Chapter 1358. Things weren't that simple. What exactly was going on? Poplar Fruit sat down next to Wenjua and listened carefully to his analysis. The people from Cayenne province weren't here. Although Administrator Zong was an old criminal police officer, he still had a little pride. He didn't think that a few soldiers who only knew how to use machine guns and cannons would be able to analyze anything. Just now, Poplar Fruit, did you say that this person's accent was Shishan? Wenjua pointed to the masked bandit on the screen and asked. The accent is very light. Maybe he's been outside for a long time, but it's hard to change the accent. I still heard it. Poplar Fruit nodded. Looking at his pitiful daughter in the video, he couldn't help but feel sad. However, he still didn't change his expression, as if he was watching a movie that had nothing to do with him. The bank robbery case 4 years ago. Do you still remember that I told you that the interrogation results later found that they weren't ordinary bank robbers, but drug dealers from the north? Wenjua said. Why did he suddenly mention them? No matter how calm Poplar Fruit was, he couldn't help but breathe faster. He looked sternly at the robber in the video and asked doubtfully, Big brother, do you mean that the people who kidnapped Kiki are the same group of people? I'm not completely sure. And even if they are, it's not the same group of people. Wenjua analyzed. There are 3 reasons why I think it might be them. First, the place where they sold drugs was in Shishan. The Shishan police arrested all of them. Only the 4 suspects escaped by train. Wenjua said. In this way, the Shishan accent was very suspicious. Didn't Lu DePeo also have a Shishan accent? If the only suspect who escaped from the bank robbery case was also from Shishan, then it was very likely that he came back to seek revenge. However, this reason was too far-fetched. Wenjua continued to analyze. Second, didn't I tell you that one of them escaped? We've been tracking them for a long time, but we haven't found out where they escaped to. But it's very likely that we've made a mistake. Wenjua said seriously. We thought their boss was from Thailand, so he should have escaped to Thailand. But what if he didn't go to Thailand? Back then, the kidnappers had told him that they were in Thailand, but the dinghy had never returned. It was very likely that the escaped suspect had killed them. Then, Wenjua's deduction was very likely to be true. Don't be fooled by the fact that these people are involved in kidnapping and extortion now. Yan Wanxiong just said that they relied on the support of the warlords and started their business through drug trafficking. It was only after Peng Jiaxing came back a few years ago and emphasized the prohibition of drugs again to win the hearts of the people that they turned to kidnapping and extortion. Wenjua went straight to the point. And the person who escaped back then, wasn't he a big drug lord? Poplar Fruit frowned. It seemed that a lot of clues pointed to Wenjua's speculation. But, in this case, what was originally a simple kidnapping, coupled with this unknown hatred, became very complicated. If it wasn't a kidnapping, but a follow-up revenge of the bank robbery 4 years ago, Poplar Fruit felt that even if he paid the ransom, Kiki's life wouldn't be guaranteed. Wenjua wasn't done yet. He pulled up a screenshot of the surveillance video on the computer and pointed to the person in the video. He said, This is the suspect who escaped back then. He's very anti-reconnaissance, so you can't see his face from the surveillance video. But you can compare his size. Isn't he similar to this masked man? The body shape could change, but the size wouldn't, unless it shrank with age. But it wouldn't change much in 4 years. Although the angle was biased, Poplar Fruit could see that the height of the 2 people should be about the same. Poplar Fruit rubbed his eyebrows tiredly. He didn't sleep yesterday, so it didn't affect him too much. But worrying about Kiki and constantly analyzing all kinds of information consumed too much of Poplar Fruit's energy. Even with the Nigong slowly nourishing his body, Poplar Fruit's energy was somewhat difficult to sustain. However, even if Poplar Fruit and the others were here to guess blindly, they couldn't do anything to the criminals. Because, until now, Poplar Fruit and the others still couldn't figure out their whereabouts. However, there was a new direction to solve the case. This might allow Administrator Zong and other experienced criminal police to find some clues. So when Poplar Fruit and Wenjua repeated the analysis to the police in Cayenne, Administrator Zong rushed out again. Yan Wanxiong frowned. Although he was the director, he used to be a criminal investigator. So when he encountered a big case, he was always interested in commanding. But this time, the police in Cayenne lost face. A living person disappeared just like that. They used so many police and manpower, but they didn't save my daughter. Yin Wanxiong was stressed. It wasn't just the pressure of public opinion, but also because of the huge social impact caused by this incident. The higher-ups also ordered him to quickly solve the case and ensure the safety of the hostage. If it's still within Cayenne, then it's fine. If it's really outside the country, we can only watch. Yin Wanxiong said gloomily. The police couldn't go, and the soldiers of the army couldn't go in large numbers. That was equivalent to a declaration of war between countries. If it's outside the country, then let us do it. The weapons we brought this time are not standard, and there are few people, so the target is not big. Myanmar won't find out. Don't worry, Director Yin. Wenjua said. He found that he really came to the right place. If necessary, I will apply to the higher-ups, and also transfer a few people from our special forces to help. Yin Wanxiong said. If they went to Myanmar, it wouldn't necessarily be a matter of a dozen people. Maybe, they would have to face the size of a small army. No matter what, when the time comes, please be sure to protect Kiki's safety. Poplar Fruit said, and pulled out the 2 Miao Dao from the backpack. His expression was as calm as ice. While wiping the blades, he said softly, You don't have to worry about me. All the tactical arrangements are to rescue the hostage. I'm counting on everyone. Looking at Poplar Fruit bowing in the cold light of the 2 Miao Dao, Yin Wanxiong's eyelids trembled. He knew that the person in front of him was not an easy person to deal with. Zheng Yujia walked back with a tired face and said to Poplar Fruit, You don't have to worry about the money. Give me those 10 accounts. I'll get someone to prepare them first. Thank you, Yujia. Poplar Fruit bowed again. This attitude made Zheng Yujia frown. She felt uncomfortable, as if the Poplar Fruit in front of her had changed into a different person. She paused and turned to find Fong Beibei. Fong Beibei and Poplar Fruit had lived together for so long. She was probably the only one who could make Poplar Fruit normal. I'm fine. Poplar Fruit shook his head. His hands held the handle of the Miao Dao, sometimes exerting force, sometimes relaxing. He seemed to want to increase his fighting strength right now. The coldness of the Miao Dao was getting stronger and stronger. This was because the Miao Dao was bloodthirsty. Uncle. Fong Beibei's soft little hand pressed on the back of Poplar Fruit's hand. Her voice made Poplar Fruit sober up a little. The beautiful girl's figure gradually became clearer. He had entered a state just now. You didn't rest yesterday. Why don't you go and sleep first? Fong Beibei had a deeper understanding of Poplar Fruit's body. She gently advised, There are still 10 hours. Before that, you can't ruin yourself. Go sleep, adjust your state, and then go rescue Kiki. Then we'll settle the score with those bad people, okay? Fong Beibei's persuasion had an effect in the end. Poplar Fruit did show signs of qi deviation because of his overthinking just now. Fortunately, he escaped in time. He closed his eyes tiredly. Without looking, he directly sheathed the dual blades. When he opened his eyes again, there were already some fluctuations of humanity. I'm going to sleep. If you have any new developments, no matter big or small, please be sure to wake me up. Poplar Fruit finally looked at Fong Beibei. He hoped that Fong Beibei could understand his meaning. Don't worry. Fong Beibei took Poplar Fruit's hand and hugged one of his hands to her chest. She looked at him worriedly. Poplar Fruit directly slept in the conference room with his clothes on. To be honest, he could not sleep, but Poplar Fruit forced himself to sleep. So tired. Poplar Fruit, who had been going smoothly for the past 4 years, felt physically and mentally exhausted for the first time. Why did he feel so powerless for the first time? Chapter 1359. For those who don't remember this foreshadowing, you can read chapters 123 to 132. Water. Everywhere was a vast and boundless ocean. The cold gazes of the smuggler and paparazzi on the sampan. When he swung his knife, it turned out to be his boss's gaze. Huff, huff, huff. It was that messy dream again. The smoker squinted his eyes. His mind was still in a daze. His hands trembled as he took out a packet of powder from the pistol beside his pillow. He opened it and pressed one side of his nose to inhale the powder. Some of the powder scattered, but the smoker didn't pay much attention to it. He still had a lot of it. What was there to be afraid of? It had been a long time since he had this dream. That cold night when he was running away in a panic seemed so real in his dreams. The world was spinning after he inhaled the powder. The smoker realized that his memories had become clearer. He still remembered the failed bank robbery. He didn't know why, but his boss Supan and Lu DePeo all died inside. Because he was waiting outside, he saw that the situation wasn't good and slipped away quickly, so he was able to escape. The small sampan set off on time, but the smoking addict was the only one left out of the original group of 4. It wasn't because of their brotherhood that he was reluctant to leave. If those guys were caught alive, they would definitely betray him, so he could only escape. However, after the sampan passed Nanyue, the smoker suddenly didn't want to go to Thailand. Because he went to Thailand, he was unfamiliar with the place and did not know Thai like Lu DePeo. The only possibility was to seek refuge with the boss's family. However, the boss and Supan both died in China while he survived. It was obvious that he would die if he went there. So he decided to go to Myanmar. The smoker was left outside not because he was weak, but because he was smart. He was good at providing support. He was even the one who contacted the smuggler. Every snake had its own way of doing things. The smoker was very good at dealing with people. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was good at dealing with people. Why did he want to go to Myanmar? Because he didn't know any other languages. If he went to Myanmar, there would be a bunch of Chinese who spoke Mandarin. First, he would turn from guest to host. The smoker had a good plan. But the smoking addict was in trouble right from the start. The man from the smugglers had told him that he could go to Myanmar, but the price would be 10 times higher. Seeing that Smoke Ghost was alone, he wanted to take advantage of him. But how could the cigarette addict accept this? He feigned civility and secretly seized an opportunity to pull out the dagger hidden in the bottom of his shoe. He stabbed the henchman from behind, then picked up the gun and took control of the sampan. When they reached Myanmar, the smoking addict was just as ruthless. He killed all the boatmen and sailors on the sampan. He didn't even leave the ship behind. After sinking it, he pushed it into the sea. He wanted to cut off any clues that could lead to him being tracked down and captured. He knew that based on the crimes he had committed in the West Mountains, 100 deaths were enough. In the end, the smoker found a warlord in Myanmar and used his wits to get into their most secretive and profitable drug business. Then, relying on his ruthlessness, he directly replaced the original leader the next year and pulled the local Chinese to establish a new force. The smoking addict was called the smoking addict because he sold and used poison himself. After becoming the leader, it was fortunate that he restrained himself. Otherwise, he would probably have died from overdosing like the previous leader. But good times didn't last long. Peng Jiaxing came back, and the enforcement of drug prohibition became stricter. The smoking addict's small team was no match for the king of Guogan. He could only tuck his tail between his legs. But without the huge profits of the drug business, the smoking addict couldn't support so many people. But the smoking addict was a smart person. He gathered his team again and started kidnapping and extorting people. Although it wasn't as profitable as the drug business, it still made a lot of money. Plus, he didn't have to work too hard to make a lot of money. Just as his brothers on the mountain were happily enjoying the life of luxury brought by the ransom, the smoking addict keenly realized that this kind of life wouldn't last long. He already had thoughts of retreating, but before that he had to settle his brothers down. He couldn't just leave like that. If he publicly said that he didn't want to do it, someone would kill him in minutes and take over. The Golden Triangle was such a cruel place. Warlords fought and drug lords ran rampant. At the very least, the smoking addict had to exchange enough benefits for his subordinates before he could leave safely. At this time, the smoking addict, who often watched domestic TV series online, found poplar fruit on a domestic website. Moreover, he was also surprised to find that Yang Guo was the guy who had caused him to flee in panic and wander about in misery. The smoking addict wanted revenge, but of course, it wasn't for the 3 brothers from 4 years ago. It was for himself. The failure back then was like an inner demon shrouding him. A few years ago, he still dreamed about the failure of the bank robbery every day. Plus, he found out that Poplar Fruit was also a rich person. If he could donate so much money, it was reasonable for him to share some of the money for himself. But after thinking about it for a long time, the smoking addict still didn't know where to start. He wanted to bring his men back to the country to cause trouble for Poplar Fruit, but that wasn't realistic. If dozens of people were to sneak back, they would probably be killed by the great border guards at the border. It wasn't safe for just a few people. More importantly, he had heard that the border guards in Guangdong were very strict, and there were people in Thailand who were investigating him. He could only give up. The smoking addict had always been paying attention to the news on the internet. He didn't expect that after half a year, Poplar Fruit would come knocking on his door. First, the 5 big wolves went home to visit their parents and found out where their father went to film in Mengjing. At that time, the smoking addict was excited. He immediately gathered his brothers to discuss countermeasures. He just spread the news that Poplar Fruit was a billionaire who could make them a lot of money. His subordinates were as excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Someone said that 100 million was too little. They might as well kidnap Poplar Fruit and make him use all his wealth to buy his life. The smoking addict smiled bitterly. Kidnapping Poplar Fruit? They really dared to think about it. Back then, the 3 of them, Boss Supan and Lu DePeo, who had guns, couldn't handle Poplar Fruit alone. How could they have the strength to deal with Poplar Fruit? The most important thing was that they couldn't bring all their brothers in arms to cross the border to commit the crime. Intimidated by Poplar Fruit's strength, the smoking addict came up with a new strategy, which was to kidnap his daughter. Therefore, a carefully prepared kidnapping plan was brought out. They followed caught kidnapped, escaped blackmailed, ransomed, and so on. They had a chance to do it on the first day, but there were too many people walking around at that time, and the 5 big wolves weren't 100% sure. The next day in the mountains, the 5 big wolves couldn't get close to the camp. Kiki wasn't alone, and there were armed forest policemen in the team to ensure the safety of the guests. Finally, on the 3rd day, when Poplar Fruit wasn't paying attention, the 5 big wolves finally succeeded. They didn't even need to use the last trump card of more than a dozen armed forces. Administrator Zhong guessed right. That night, they sneaked back to Myanmar through the Luo River, leaving no chance for the Cayenne police to find them. Of course, there was still one person who stayed in Shidon Bana. He was responsible for receiving the video from Myanmar and uploading it to the internet. Then he used a local phone card to send instructions to Poplar Fruit. In this way, Poplar Fruit couldn't know that the next step was to go to Myanmar, so the police were left outside the border. Why would they be afraid of a Poplar Fruit with dozens of guns? This was a kidnapping plan that the smoking addict had spent a month to come up with. He proudly said to his men, "Look at my head, it's flawless." Chapter 1360. Deep in the mountains and forests, although it was quiet and dark, and there was no movement of any creatures, it was terrible, as if it was a horror scene in a movie. Poplar Fruit seemed to be the incarnation of a magical existence that could integrate with everything in the world. One moment, he was wandering on a deserted path, and the next moment, he seemed to be floating in the sky, overlooking the world below. Where is this? Poplar Fruit floated in the air for a while in a daze. Suddenly, he heard a weak cry for help in the wind. "Papa, help me!" Iki. In an instant, Poplar Fruit felt as if his blood was flowing backward, and his head suddenly swelled. He remembered that he was here to save his daughter. Where is Kiki? Where is Kiki? Poplar Fruit floated like a ghost, and bumped around like a headless fly. But no matter how hard he bumped, he could not find any trace of his daughter. He wanted to follow the sound, but the cry for help was like a surround sound speaker. It came from all directions, and he could not find the source at all. Look. But he did not see a single figure. Not to mention a figure, even a living thing could not be seen. Even the towering trees seemed to be lifeless. Poplar Fruit found that he was getting tired quickly. Gradually, the more he floated, the more tired he became. But he was still looking. Even if he was tired to death, he would find his daughter who was crying and calling for her father. Finally, he saw a shabby factory hidden in the vast mountains. He did not know what it was manufacturing, but it was enough to make Poplar Fruit happy. After searching for a long time, He found a place where there might be people. Maybe his daughter was inside. Poplar Fruit's mental state was a little strange at the moment. It was as if he had gone crazy. He did not care whether there were enemies inside or not, and rushed in recklessly. Kiki. Kiki. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit saw a window. Through the window, he could see his daughter tied to a chair miserably, just like what he saw in the video. But she was even more haggard. She hadn't rested well and hadn't eaten well. Her little face was almost as thin as an oval face. Before she was tied up, her hair, which had been washed clean, was now dirty. Her arms and ankles were a little red and swollen because of the hemp rope. Seeing this, Poplar Fruit was so distressed that tears almost flowed out of his eyes. But strangely, Poplar Fruit could not cry. Kiki was locked up alone. Strangely, there was not a single enemy guarding the entire factory. But Poplar Fruit didn't care whether it was strange or not. He just wanted to untie the rope and save his daughter. However, his previously invincible and intangible body couldn't even pass through a small iron door. Poplar Fruit angrily pounded on the iron door with his fist, but the iron door did not budge. Even the sound of knocking could not be heard. It was as silent as the surroundings. Of course, even if he didn't care whether his body could take it or not, he wouldn't feel any pain. What a strange feeling. But gradually he became desperate. It was close at hand, but it seemed to be at the end of the world. Poplar Fruit clung to the window, but he couldn't even break the thin window. He could only struggle to call his daughter, but he couldn't make any sound. He gradually went crazy. Papa, boo-hoo, is it Papa? Kiki seemed to feel something. The little girl raised her tear-stained face and looked at the window where Poplar Fruit was struggling. But her eyes seemed to pass through Poplar Fruit and didn't stop. It's Papa. It's Papa. Kiki, don't be afraid. Papa is coming to save you. Poplar Fruit shouted in his heart. But he couldn't break through the thin wall. His heart was full of hope, but it gradually turned into despair. Suddenly, he heard a roar. Poplar Fruit jumped to the window and looked in. He found that his daughter was gradually retreating with the chair, and gradually disappeared into the endless darkness. No, Poplar Fruit suddenly shouted and struggled to get up from the bed. Fong Beibei, who heard the sound outside, quickly opened the door and walked in. She was also very tired. Sitting outside, she almost fell asleep. But she was worried about Poplar Fruit's physical and mental state. She didn't dare to sleep. How is it? Fong Beibei was worried and gently patted Poplar Fruit's back. His back was wet with cold sweat. She handed the hot water that she had poured before to Poplar Fruit and said with heartache, "Don't ruin your body. Kiki is blessed by the heavens. She will be fine." Poplar Fruit took a big gulp and handed the cup to Fong Beibei. He looked at her gratefully and said softly, "I know. I just dreamed of Kiki, so my reaction was a bit big." After drinking the cup of hot water, a warm feeling flowed from his stomach to his whole body. Poplar Fruit could finally draw a clear line between illusion and reality. Fong Beibei put the cup aside, then opened her arms and hugged Poplar Fruit's waist from the side. Poplar Fruit also opened his big hands and hugged Fong Beibei in his arms. He let her beautiful face gently stick to his chest. "I know that you are very worried about Kiki, but no matter what decision you make, I will support you 100%. Fong Beibei said, and her voice was a bit choked. "But if anything happens to you, I will go with you." Originally, Fong Beibei's spirit had been tense for almost the whole day. She had always been very strong, but at this time, when it came to the depths of love, her emotions began to lose control. Pisces girls were the most insecure, and they were the easiest to let their imagination run wild. Fong Beibei had been a lot better in recent years, but she was still deeply dependent on Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit sighed and rubbed Fong Beibei's head. He said with heartache, "Silly, what nonsense are you talking about? We will be fine." Fong Beibei obediently murmured. Poplar Fruit knew Fong Beibei's current state. He gently patted Fong Beibei's back and said, "Go to sleep first. Don't talk about me. Don't ruin your own body." "What about you?" Fong Beibei asked softly. "I have slept for 4 hours. For the first time ever, Yang slept for an extra hour," he said. "I've already revived with full health and mana." Poplar Fruit even made a small joke. Although it was not funny at all, it could more or less make Fang Beibei feel at ease. She was too worried about Poplar Fruit's mental state. I will go out and have a look. Hopefully, there will be new progress. Poplar Fruit covered Fang Beibei with a quilt and considerately tucked in the corner of the quilt. To the enemy, Poplar Fruit was ruthless. To his wife, Poplar Fruit would only be gentle. I will watch you go out before I sleep. Fang Beibei curled up in the quilt full of Poplar Fruit's body temperature. She obediently nodded, and said a little coquettishly. Poplar Fruit smiled, stood up and walked out. On the way, he turned off the light. It was actually just a dream. Standing at the door, Poplar Fruit showed his powerlessness and decadence on his face. He clenched his fist and faintly sighed. Daughter, where are you? Chapter 1361. It was already late at night, but there was still no news. Yen Wanxiong only gave a new update. The border patrols had been strengthened. However, it didn't work. Poplar Fruit didn't know about the public opinion online, nor did he want to read it. People came and went in the command center. Poplar Fruit walked into the meeting room where Big Brother he and the others were resting. Meng Sanhua was lying on the table with his legs crossed and a jacket covering his body. The three of them were taking turns to rest. He Wenjue and Yang Zhengdong were sitting on the side energetically. It seemed that they had already slept. Seeing Meng Sanhua sleeping, Poplar Fruit wasn't worried. He pulled a chair over and sat down. When these soldiers were sleeping, as long as she didn't yell in their ears, they would be able to sleep peacefully. He Wenjue glanced at Poplar Fruit and said calmly, "Don't worry." Even though Poplar Fruit was expressionless, the worry and anxiety in his eyes were as thick as espressos. Poplar Fruit nodded slightly. He didn't say anything and just looked at He Wenjue and Yang Zhengdong. The two of them also had nothing to do. One was dismantling and reassembling a weapon, while the other was practicing his fighting techniques with a dagger. He Wenjue reassembled the gun and handed it to Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit realized that the gun was still his. "You've been hiding it for too long. There's some dust on the barrel. Let me wipe it for you." He Wenjue loved guns as much as his life. He was different from Poplar Fruit, who was just a gun enthusiast. Even though the dust didn't affect the use of the gun, he just didn't like it. He was like a Virgo with OCD in this aspect. Poplar Fruit picked up the gun, removed the clip, and pulled the bolt. He knew that the gun was fine, but he still shook his head and said to He Wenjue, "Bro, do you have any more clips?" Fang Beibei had brought the gun, but she only brought one full clip. It wasn't enough. "You don't need so many bullets in a frontal attack, right?" Yang Zhengdong smiled. "Don't worry, I'll cover you with the sniper." "I still need it," Poplar Fruit insisted. He Wenjue shook his head. He took out 2 empty clips and a box of bullets from his backpack and handed them to Poplar Fruit. He Wenjue was careful. "A silencer, give me one too." Yang Guo looked at the bag behind He Wenjue, which was like an ammunition depot, and was very envious. He Wenjue rolled his eyes, turned around and handed it to him. Since he was going to bring a weapon, Poplar Fruit had to prepare well. First he changed into a refined combat uniform. It was also He Wenjue's. It was dark green and was very hidden in the forest. Of course, Poplar Fruit tore off the military and nationality symbols. The gun was tied to his left calf with a holster. It could be hidden by pulling down his trouser leg. The 2 clips were loaded and pinned to his waist. There was a small, delicate pocket there. Poplar Fruit didn't bring the rest of the bullets. He didn't need that many. In addition to the gun, Yang Guo also followed He Wenjue's request and stuffed a small GPS signal device in her shirt pocket. This way, He Wenjue and the others could use the GPS to determine Yang Guo's location. As for how to carry the 2 long miaodao, Poplar Fruit was still thinking about it. It was too conspicuous to carry on his back, but it couldn't fit in the money bag. It would look like a burden instead. Poplar Fruit was in a dilemma. Suddenly, a police officer rushed over and shouted, "Poplar Fruit, there's news." Behind him was Fang Beibei, who was still rubbing her eyes. It seemed that the police officer had woken her up. Suddenly there was chaos. Poplar Fruit was the first to rush to the command center, followed by He Wenjue and the others. Zheng Yujia, who had put on her clothes, hurried over. What's the situation? Poplar Fruit asked. Yan Wanxiong handed Poplar Fruit's phone to him. There was a short message on it. Prepare the money. You have 2 hours to reach the following address. Only you are allowed to come. If there is a second person following, they will be held hostage. To be precise, it was a multimedia message because the so-called address was actually a screenshot of a map. Poplar Fruit didn't know much about the geography of the area. He asked doubtfully, "Where is this?" Yan Wanxiong said with an ugly expression, "Myanmar, East 10 peaks of the Dajita Mountains." He opened a military map and pointed to the computer screen for Poplar Fruit to see. It was not far, really not far. It was actually 4 kilometers from the border. But these 4 kilometers, for Yan Wanxiong, were like heaven and earth. This meant that no matter how many police officers he had, no matter how many elite special police officers he had, they would not be able to cross the border to help Poplar Fruit. This kidnapper was really too cunning. Almost everyone had the same thought in their minds. It wasn't just the choice of location, but also the time. It was already late at night, and there were still 5 hours before the deadline that the kidnapper had mentioned. This meant that Poplar Fruit had to cross the border in the middle of the night, which also meant that there would be a lot of obstacles in the rescue operation. Not to mention Poplar Fruit, Wenjua, and the other 2 definitely wouldn't be able to move freely in the middle of the night. And 2 hours, if they acted now, it might only be enough. If they still dilly-dallied, it would be completely impossible to reach the destination. Fortunately, the only good news was that the 2 million yuan had been prepared. Yan Wanxiong had also told the border guards that they would turn a blind eye and let Poplar Fruit cross the border. But everything had not been deployed yet. The special forces of the Shudu military region had not arrived yet. Should they discuss with the other party about the time? Impossible. Every time the other party sent a message, the SIM card would be taken off. There was no way to contact them. The other party was like Zhuge Liang, strategizing and controlling everything from the shadows. The police couldn't get any information at all. They could only be passive. What should they do? What should they do? Yan Wanxiong and Kai Yin were arguing with each other. But Poplar Fruit was very calm. On the contrary, he was a little happy, because he had enough of waiting without any news. The sooner the rescue operation started, the sooner Kiki could be rescued. "Don't say anything, I'll go first. Brother, you come half an hour later. Be careful not to get too close to me, in case we expose our whereabouts." Poplar Fruit said calmly, then he turned to look at Yan Wanxiong. "If they can catch up, please help them. If they can't, we'll take action first." Wenjua nodded. Although the mission was very dangerous, he Yang Zhengdong and Meng Sanhua were all dancing on the edge of a knife. "No. They all have guns. It's too dangerous." Yan Wanxiong said excitedly, "Poplar Fruit, this is not the time to show off. No matter how good your kung fu is, you can't avoid being shot, you know? It's too late." Poplar Fruit pressed on Yan Wanxiong's shoulder and said softly. Yan Wanxiong paused for a moment and let out a depressed sigh. Chapter 1362. Poplar Fruit quickly packed his luggage. 2 large suitcases stuffed with 2 million in cash and a duffel bag, including 2 miaodao that were tied diagonally to the top of the suitcases. From afar, it was impossible to see any flaws. Downstairs, he stuffed the suitcases into the back of the police jeep. Not only the 2 girls, Fang Beibei and Zheng Yujia, but also Yan Wanxiong and the other police officers stood behind Poplar Fruit with heavy expressions. It was as if Poplar Fruit was about to embark on a path of no return. Going alone into a bandit's nest that might have dozens of gunmen. What would the result be? Even if he knew that Poplar Fruit was superhuman, and that he Wenjua and the others were battle-hardened, Yan Wanxiong still felt that it was a hopeless situation. But Poplar Fruit insisted on going. As a father, Yan Wanxiong understood Poplar Fruit's feelings very well. If it were him, he would also risk his life to save his daughter. So Yan Wanxiong's feelings were very complicated. But Poplar Fruit didn't mean to take care of his thoughts. He hugged Fang Beibei and comforted her. Fang Beibei shed tears, but she didn't dare to cry out loud, afraid that it would affect Poplar Fruit's mood. Patting Fang Beibei's shoulder, Poplar Fruit forced a smile and said, "Why are you crying? It's not like I'm not coming back." As soon as these words came out, Zheng Yujie, who was at the back, could no longer be strong. She also covered her mouth, and 2 lines of clear tears poured down. Feng Beibei was even more unable to control her emotions. 2 girls. One was his wife, and the other, including He Wenjue, looked at them with a strange expression. It was a kind of dilemma that they wanted to ask but couldn't. Poplar Fruit looked at the 2 girls and didn't feel good. He clenched his teeth and hugged Zheng Yujie into his arms. He didn't hug them all, but his long arms still gave Zheng Yujie support to wipe her tears. Although there was a suspicion of hugging left and right, Poplar Fruit swore that his thoughts were really pure. He couldn't let his feelings go on. It had been 15 minutes since he received the message. Poplar Fruit had to hurry up and get on the road. Poplar Fruit hugged the 2 girls' shoulders tightly. His tone returned to calm and he said firmly, "Okay. Trust me, I'll bring Kiki and me back safely." He Wenjue finally held the car door and reminded Poplar Fruit, "Be careful, don't be rash." Poplar Fruit was very strong, stronger than many ordinary Special Forces soldiers, but the other party had Kiki as a hostage. He Wenjue was worried that Poplar Fruit would act irrationally. Poplar Fruit nodded, and finally looked back at them deeply. He waved his hand, and turned to get into the car. The jeep was a little shaky on the mountain road, and no one spoke the whole way. Poplar Fruit pressed one hand on his Miaodao scabbard, and his eyes were slightly closed. The closer they were to danger, the colder Poplar Fruit felt his boiling blood become. He might be a natural warrior, but this time, he was here to save people and take revenge. Soon they arrived at the border. A team of border guards walked over from the sentry post. They looked at Poplar Fruit, who got out of the car, and waved their hands to let him go with them. However, they kept a straight face and didn't say anything, as if nothing had happened. It was Poplar Fruit's first time crossing the border without a visa, but he didn't have time to record his feelings. He carried the backpack diagonally and dragged the 2 suitcases. He buried his head and walked into the vast world shrouded in darkness. In the summer night, there was a bit of fog in the hot and humid mountain forest. Poplar Fruit soon felt that his clothes were sticky, but his footsteps were firm, and he walked in the direction and route in his memory. It was quiet all around, and no one was following him. Poplar Fruit knew that he was the only one who could continue on this path. It was a little inconvenient to drag the suitcases through the mountain forest. From time to time, rocks or tree roots would bump it up, and the suitcases stuffed with 100 yuan would often twist and overturn on the ground. Too slow. Poplar Fruit frowned. This speed was only a little faster than normal walking. Instead of dragging it, it would be better. Poplar Fruit exerted force on his wrist, and lifted the 2 suitcases with his hands. It was like a monk in a novel using a wooden bucket to carry water. Using both hands, he walked as if he was flying. Only Poplar Fruit had the strength and stamina to lift and carry something that weighed more than 15 kilograms, and then run for nearly 2 kilometers in a spurt of energy. About half of the journey, Poplar Fruit took a break to catch his breath. At the same time, he took out the police GPS provided by Yan Wanxiong to confirm his position to ensure that he didn't go the wrong way. Although his memory and sense of direction weren't bad, walking in the pitch-black forest, Yangwu didn't dare to guarantee that he wouldn't go astray as he walked. Speaking of which, Poplar Fruit's night vision wasn't bad. Although it wasn't as good as night vision goggles, it was still much better than ordinary people. This was because his eyes could see very clearly through the weak moonlight at night. The forest was indeed pitch black, but for Poplar Fruit, it was like walking in a dark alley. He could still see the ground clearly. Indeed, he didn't walk to the 2-kilometer mark, but it wasn't because he was going in the wrong direction. Poplar Fruit thought for a moment and suddenly realized. The distance marked on the map was that long, but in reality, there was still a big deviation. Just like how you had to turn when there was a tree in front of you, Poplar Fruit would also try to walk around a small hill in front of him. So after walking around and around, the distance increased by a lot. In this way, Poplar Fruit had to speed up. Otherwise, if he couldn't get to the designated place on time, Poplar Fruit couldn't imagine the consequences. In this way, Poplar Fruit walked in the forest in the dark, as if he didn't care about the foreign land under his feet. He also didn't care if he would encounter wild beasts, or even bandits lying in ambush on the side of the road. waiting to catch him. A turtle in a jar. Of course, Poplar Fruit still maintained vigilance. Although he didn't care, he still paid attention to his surroundings with his senses. He didn't have time to look left and right. Arrived. Poplar Fruit spent more than half an hour to walk the remaining 4 kilometers. This was much slower than a marathon, but it couldn't be helped. Who asked Poplar Fruit to carry 2 heavy boxes of money? This was already a very amazing result. Arriving at the designated place 20 minutes early, Poplar Fruit frowned and looked around vigilantly. Then, he carefully walked towards the so-called landmark building. A small wooden house built in the mountains. It was so simple that it couldn't even be compared to the small rain shed in the orchard. But there was nothing inside, not even a person. Did I go the wrong way? Chapter 1363. On this day, Xiaoluoka was very anxious. He was listless in class. After class, he had been squatting in front of the computer, refreshing Weibo and the news over and over again. He couldn't eat or sleep well if he didn't see any good news. Many girls who had a crush on him saw their Prince Charming so haggard, and their hearts were broken. Xiaoluoka was a strange name because he gave it to himself. He was an international student from Canada. He was a Chinese and Canadian hybrid, which made him the most popular boy in Shuemu University. But in fact, Xiaoluoka rarely attended parties for international students. He was a traditional boy. In other words, he was a shy otaku. Because of Chinese culture, he came to China to study. Now, not only could he speak fluent and slightly accented Mandarin, but he also liked to read Chinese online novels and variety shows. Recently, Xiaoluoka liked a newly broadcast parent-child variety show, especially My Daughter's Guest, Kiki. Not to mention how beautiful this girl was. Her kindness, naivety, and cuteness when she interacted with her father made Xiaoluoka very fond of her. Xiaoluo had analyzed just what level of affection he had for Qiqi was at. The little girl was very beautiful, there was no doubt about that, but she was too young to make Xiaoluoka have that kind of pink adoration. If it wasn't the attraction between men and women, then his love for Kiki should be similar to the love of a big brother to a little sister. Or, he should also be overflowing with fatherly love. She was good-looking, and every frown and smile made the dim dormitory bright, making everyone who saw her want to hold her in their arms and love her. Wearing a princess dress, she was as exquisite as a real princess. Even if she changed into ordinary clothes, it couldn't hide her delicate and beautiful appearance. Her personality was also very likable. Other than dreaming of being a princess, the little girl didn't seem to have too many ambitious goals. She was usually gentle and kind. She wouldn't argue with others, nor would she play any tricks. On the contrary, she could actively take responsibility and help her friends complete their tasks. Not only was there no competition, Kiki was also her father's warm baby. When she was playing games, she was worried about her father, and the tears that fell down her face made people feel distressed and warm in their hearts. Of course, Kiki was definitely not a fragile and crybaby girl like Lin Daiyu. Seeing her carrying a heavy basket and running like the wind, almost everyone in the audience couldn't help but laugh from the bottom of their hearts. Also, the little girl was very smart. She remembered everything her father said. Sometimes, the little stories she made up could make you laugh the whole day. That's right, when the little girl first appeared, everyone thought that she was a quiet little lady. But later, they realized that she could also be playful and cute. Big Yang, Little Yang, Little Yang. The little girl did not make her father dizzy, but the audience was attracted by her cuteness. Who wouldn't want such a beautiful, good-natured, smart, and cute little girl as their daughter? Xiaoluo, who was not married yet, had never considered the problem of his marriage. However, where did his father go in 2 phases, he realized that he wanted to get married. To be exact, she wanted to have a daughter as cute as Kiki. This wish could not be turned into reality, because to get married, he had to find a girlfriend who was willing to marry him. Now Charlotte did not have a girlfriend. However, he who liked to read online novels, also liked to fantasize about himself being reborn into the past, then find a girlfriend he liked and have a super beautiful and cute daughter. Well, after watching this season's show, he would write a novel like this online. The protagonist was also a Canadian. The main plot was to go to Taiwan to start a variety show and eventually become an entertainment tycoon. Of course, he had to marry a very beautiful Chinese girl and have a super beautiful little princess. Finally, he came to the mainland to plan a parent-child show called Where Are We Going, Dad? And bring his daughter to participate as a guest. Xia Luo had already thought of the name of the novel. It would be called My Princess. The protagonist's surname was also Xia, and his name was Xia Kelly. It was very similar to the pronunciation of chocolate. He was a very gentle and sweet man. His daughter's name was Xia Tian because she met you this summer, liked you, and wanted to protect you. Just thinking about it made him happy. However, in the morning, he saw the news that suddenly broke out on the internet. During the recording of the show, Kiki was kidnapped. At first, Xia Luo thought that it was fake news, but his last bit of hope was shattered by the kidnapping video that went viral on the internet. Sometimes, fantasies brought about very real feelings. Although he was just an ordinary audience member, and only began to pay attention to and like this little girl this month, Kiki's misfortune seemed to be his daughter's misfortune. All of Xia Luo's good mood disappeared. All that was left was his concern, worry, and anxiety for Kiki. For the whole day, Xia Luo didn't eat or drink. He only browsed the computer with all kinds of security experts' guesses. He didn't see the police or Poplar Fruit come forward to say anything about the latest developments. Why didn't anyone tell everyone what the situation was? Even if you were short of money, Poplar Fruit just had to shout on Weibo, and our fans would pay for Kiki's redemption. It had to be said that many fans were as cute as Xia Luo. However, a day passed without any progress. When he went to bed at night, Xia Luo couldn't sleep. He browsed the news over and over again, even if it was boring and unconfirmed news. He still couldn't sleep until 3 o'clock in the morning. Xia Luo was disappointed. At this moment, Poplar Fruit was dragging dozens of kilograms of cash and rushing through the mountains outside the southwest border. How could he have the time to take out his mobile phone and post on Weibo? Even if it was the Public Security Department's news briefing on Sayun's side, they wouldn't reveal the slightest bit of secrets at this critical juncture of the case. What if the bandits were also watching? Of course, Xia Luo was quite extreme after all. Many people ate what they should and slept what they should. However, Kiki's uncertain life and death really affected the hearts of millions of fans. They also called out in their hearts, "Come back. Kiki, you must be strong and wait for the police uncle to bring you back." As if feeling the power of this belief, Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth and ran madly through the mountains and forests. He was already very tired. There was no other way. Carrying dozens of kilograms of things, he had already run more than 10 kilometers continuously. He ran from night to day, and gradually there was a green and white halo. The hateful bandits seemed to be playing with him. Every time he arrived at a location, there would be a new text message in less than 15 minutes, prompting him to run to the next location. The intention was obvious. They wanted to exhaust Poplar Fruit's physical strength. At the same time, they inadvertently disrupted the deployment between Poplar Fruit and Huanjua. Huanjua and the other two would always come up empty every time they didn't know where the final location was. This was very likely to be discovered by the other party. Poplar Fruit had already informed Big Brother he not to act rashly. He would wait until he confirmed the location before informing them of the operation. Chapter 1364. Nab was one of the confidants of the boss, the smoking addict. He was a Burmese, and he was the only one who was qualified to be a sub-boss in this team with more Chinese people. The reason was simple. He was saved by the smoking addict from the mine, and he even took a bullet for the smoking addict. He swore that he would only be the smoking addict's lackey and had no greater ambitions. It was because of his loyalty that the smoking addict sent him out. He ran around the few contact points to keep an eye on the rich guy called Fruit. The smoking addict told his subordinates that only Nab was trustworthy. The other people he sent out might kill Poplar Fruit and run away with the 2 million. Then they could forget about getting the 100 million. Therefore, the naive Nab felt that he had a great responsibility, and he spent the entire night messing with Poplar Fruit. Of course, he was happy because through his binoculars, he could see that the idiot egg in every contact point was being played by him. It was like a cat playing with a mouse. Of course, it was not that the other party did not react at all. At the first contact point, he hit on a small hill nearby and observed poplar fruit through his binoculars. He noticed that the person suddenly turned his head and looked in his direction. At that moment, he felt like a thief who was suddenly forced into a corner by the headlights of several police cars. He almost pissed his pants and wanted to run away, but fortunately, poplar fruit quickly turned his head. He breathed a sigh of relief. That's right. How could he be discovered so easily? He must have made a blind guess. After that, he secretly observed poplar fruit a few times, but Nab did not notice him. Therefore, Nab was relieved. Every time, he would wait for poplar fruit to leave for a long time. When he saw that there was no one following him, he would jump down the hill and ride his bicycle to the next location. Nab hummed a weird Chinese song as he arrived at the observation point that he had already set up. He was loyal to the Chinese boss, and he knew that if he wanted to be a good lackey, he had to learn how to communicate with the boss. What is the most important element of communication? It wasn't sincerity, nor was it flattery. It was because they shared the same language. Although the team leader had learned Burmese, he couldn't speak it well. As an outstanding lackey, he should learn Chinese well, and not make things difficult for the team leader. Only then would the team leader put him in an important position. As for the Chinese song, Nab had learned it from the 5 Great Wolves. The small leader called 5 Big Wolves was also the confidant of the big leader. Naibo asked him how he could speak Chinese well. 5 Big Wolves told him that if he wanted to learn Chinese well, he had to know how to sing this singer called Zhou Gongju. This was the easiest song to learn. Alright, I've gone a little too far. Naibo threw down his bicycle and ran up the mountain peak that wasn't too high. It was also a good place to observe from a distance. Naibo took out a pair of old binoculars from his sling bag and glanced over. Sure enough, that rich guy named Guo was already there. Although he had a bicycle and was familiar with the roads, poplar fruit always arrived before him. Naibo didn't even need to guess. Of course, other factors aside, Naibo still admired poplar fruit. After running for half the night, he was still able to run so fast. It was too amazing. The sky was just starting to brighten. There was no light, but Naibo could see clearly behind the tree. The black figure was motionless. He was probably tired, right? Even an Iron Man wouldn't be able to withstand such torment. Naibo gritted his teeth. I don't know how many more trips I have to make. Don't make me ride the bicycle to fetch him when he collapses. That would be a pain in the ass. Naibo muttered in Burmese. He took out his phone. It was the classic 1050 model from Nordic Walnut Smashing. In China, it could only be used as a spare phone for a spare phone. No one would want it even if it was given to them. Even in the increasingly prosperous stronghold, everyone had upgraded their guns to cannons. Even the small fries were using smartphones. But in Naibo's hands, the 1050 was still like a treasure, because it was given to him by the team leader 3 years ago. It was a symbol of trust and glory. No matter what, the 1050 could still be used to make a call. Naibo realized that there were still 5 minutes to the agreed time. He didn't wait any longer. He followed the agreement and sent a confirmation message back to the stronghold. This way, the stronghold would know that fruit was still under their control. Then, fruit would receive a new message and continue to run to the next location. Naibo had played with this process for a few hours and 5 or 6 times. He had already gotten the hang of it. He grinned and stared at the black figure in the distance through his binoculars. He muttered excitedly, 10, 9, 8. He was still counting down in Chinese, although his pronunciation was weird. Naibo was very accurate the last time. When the countdown reached 1, the black figure would move and take out his phone to see the message sent to him by the stronghold. He was like Zhuge Liang, who could foresee things like a god. 2-1. Naibo was depressed. Why wasn't the black figure moving this time? Could it be that the 5 Great Wolves were slacking off and teasing him? Are you waiting for this? Suddenly, a voice in Burmese came from behind. Scaring people would scare people to death. Naibo was shocked. At that moment, his hair stood on end and his scalp went numb. He subconsciously turned his head and saw a man standing behind him, looking at him coldly. However, his left hand was raised in front of him, and there was a bright phone in his hand. However, Naibo's attention was not on it at all. His pupils dilated instantly. He recognized the man who had appeared behind him without him knowing. It was actually Fruit. Wait a minute. Wasn't he behind that tree? Could he teleport? Could he be a clone? How was that possible? How could he appear behind him without a sound? Was he a ghost? At that moment, thousands of thoughts flashed through Naibo's mind. It was impossible to sort them out. He could only twist them together. It was a mess. It was a mess. He could only cut the Gordian knot. Naibo subconsciously reached for the gun on his belt. As long as he had the gun, everything would be under his control. Naibo didn't even consider if he would shoot Fruit. However, the quick knife wasn't his. Naibo suddenly felt his vision blur. His vision was a little slippery, as if he was sitting on a skateboard. Then he fell into endless darkness. Plop. A body fell heavily to the ground. The head and the body seemed to have separated. Scarlet blood immediately dyed the ground red. The sky was still green, and there wasn't a trace of sunlight. However, the dark green shrubs and weeds were already covered with blood-red dewdrops that wouldn't disappear even if the sun rose. This was just the beginning. Chapter 1365. Poplar Fruit didn't even look at Nab, who had fallen to the ground. His face was as calm as still water. He was so calm that he reminded people of those cold-blooded poisonous snakes. He lowered his head and glanced at the meowdow that he had pulled out at an unknown time, and pointed diagonally at the ground. The surface of the meowdow was as bright as a mirror. Only the sharp edge of the blade was stained with a trace of barely visible blood. Poplar Fruit's blade was too fast. Even Nab, who was still showing off just a moment ago, couldn't clearly see what had separated his head from his body. After starting the massacre, Poplar Fruit didn't have any emotional fluctuations. He squatted down and picked up the Noji 1050 that couldn't be broken no matter how he dropped it. He flipped through the phone's message records to verify his previous thoughts. In fact, when Poplar Fruit was at the first location, he had already noticed Nab spying. His mysterious premonition had come into play again. However, after he took a glance, he still maintained his calm and collected state. After that, Poplar Fruit followed the other party's instructions and kept running. He ran to 6 or 7 locations, and only now did he make his move. During this process, Nab didn't know that the seemingly stupid Poplar Fruit had already locked onto his position. Through comparison, Nab had figured out the pattern of his choice of observation points and the interval between when he started spying. Therefore, this time after Poplar Fruit arrived, he first observed the appearance of the surrounding forest. Then, without stopping, he immediately took off his jacket and used the lever of the trolley box and the cover of the forest to create the appearance of a dummy. Even though it was dawn, looking from afar, it was impossible to tell if it was a real person or a dummy. Poplar Fruit was also betting on his own judgment. The other party wouldn't arrive so early, and wouldn't realize that he had swapped the crown prince with a raccoon. He didn't hesitate at all to throw 2 million in cash on the spot. Holding his meowdow, he groped his way up to the observation point that he guessed the other party would choose, and then hid in a big tree. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit's judgment was completely correct. The other party rode a bicycle and appeared in his field of vision. Then, without any warning, he made him stand behind and watch him for a long time. Of course, this had a lot to do with Poplar Fruit's ability to restrain his aura. Poplar Fruit watched all of Nabu's actions and understood the entire process of Nabu contacting the criminals. In this way, he didn't have to be led by the nose by the other party, and he didn't have to play hide and seek with Nabu anymore. Nabu no longer had any value. Of course, Poplar Fruit originally wanted to interrogate Nabu, but it seemed that the other party didn't cooperate and directly took out his gun. How could Poplar Fruit tolerate this? He took advantage of the hatred that had been suppressed for a long time. Like Shiman Chueshue, he brazenly pulled out his knife. Although he didn't have the Night of the Moon or the summit of the Forbidden City, his knife was like lightning, and he broke through the ghost door. Comparing the information in Nabu's phone and his own information, Poplar Fruit found that the phone number that Nabu contacted was different from the one displayed on his phone. Moreover, it was more like a foreign number. Perhaps there was a mystery here. Poplar Fruit immediately informed He Wenjua and Yan Wanxiong in China, asking them to investigate and track this phone number. As for himself, Poplar Fruit put away the two phones and sighed softly. Although he killed the other party's surveillance, Kiki's whereabouts were still unknown. He still had to continue to follow the other party's instructions. When he reached the vicinity of the next location, he would pretend to be the surveillance person and send a text message to the criminals, hoping to end this torment early and find his daughter. Poplar Fruit wasn't afraid of getting dirty. He searched Nabu's body and didn't find any other meaningful clues. He only took his telescope that had a broken lens, and one of the lenses could still be used for reconnaissance. He didn't take the gun. Poplar Fruit didn't care about that broken pistol. Shaking his head, Poplar Fruit stood up. Originally, he wanted to look at the place where he had just replaced the flower with the tree, but Poplar Fruit was suddenly stunned. Although the hillside wasn't high, only about a few dozen meters, looking down from a height was completely different from staying at the foot of the hill and looking left and right. He didn't feel that he was very tall, but he felt that he was very familiar. Why did he feel that he was very familiar? This was Myanmar, a country that Poplar Fruit had never been to before. Did he pass by this place when he was on his way? Impossible. Although the other party had directed him to go around in circles in this vast forest, there wasn't a single path that was repeated or intersected. Wait. This angle, this view. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit's scalp went numb. With his excellent memory, he finally remembered where he had seen this scene before. Wasn't this what he had seen in the nightmare a few hours ago? No, it wasn't the valley where the factory had landed, but a mountain peak and forest that he had seen when he was flying through the air unconsciously. God! Poplar Fruit's breathing was heavy. He compared the two scenes again and again. It was like he was playing a game of finding fault. He compared the scene before him and the scene in his memory. The layout of the trees and the height of the mountain peak were exactly the same. How was this possible? What was going on? Poplar Fruit couldn't believe his eyes and judgment. Wait a minute. Yanghua forcefully closed his eyes. He was forcing himself to calm down. He was forcing himself to remove some of the chaotic rational thoughts and temporarily replace them with a more serious emotional thought process. Right, Kiki? Poplar Fruit suddenly opened his eyes. What dream, memory, and terrifying coincidence. Why did he care so much? If his previous dream was a miraculous reflection of reality, then it meant that Chi-Chi was locked up in the same room of the factory he dreamed of last night. In the dream, he couldn't break the door or window to bring his daughter back, but in reality, such a setting didn't exist. Yes, if Kiki was really in that factory, he didn't need to continue being led by the nose by the other party. He could be one step ahead of the other party and sneak in first to save Kiki. But the problem was Kiki really in that factory? What if his judgment was wrong? What if this terrifying coincidence was just a coincidence? Following the other party's instructions or following his own dream was a very difficult choice. Poplar Fruit closed his eyes and breathed heavily. He couldn't drag this out any longer. He had to make a decision. At 4:20 in the morning, the sky was already turning white, and there were signs of dawn in the gray sky. A cool breeze blew through the forest, causing the leaves to rustle. However, it was somber and quiet. Only the red soil that had already spread out on the ground carried a trace of the unpleasant smell of blood. Swoosh! Poplar Fruit sheathed his sword. His eyes became firm. Clearly, he had switched to a rational way of thinking. He had made his choice. Chapter 1366. Swoosh! 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 The sound from afar made a weasel that had just poked its head out of a crack shrink back. The sound of leaves breaking was not loud. The humidity in the tropical rainforest was very high at this time. Even thick shoes felt wet and a little heavy, as if they had not been completely dried after being washed. Poplar Fruit did not care. He pulled the 2 boxes of money and rolled over them. Along the way, he chose to walk in the more hidden woods, avoiding the valleys and paths that were easy to be discovered. Fortunately, he did not meet anyone. He only saw a Burmese python from afar. This one was much bigger than the one Zhou Shimin had seen. Its body was as thick as a bucket, and it was enough to swallow an adult like Poplar Fruit in one bite. Of course, Because of Poplar Fruit's vigilance and the distance between them, they passed by peacefully. They had been walking for about an hour. During this time, Poplar Fruit had used the seized Noji 1050 to send a message to the bandits in exchange for the same location. Poplar Fruit gradually understood why the bandits were doing this. They wanted to exhaust Poplar Fruit so that he could not display his terrifying skills. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not follow their instructions. In his mind, he used the memory of the previous dream to construct a rough route, correcting it as he walked. But the deeper he went, the more frightened Poplar Fruit was. It was exactly the same as the forest in the dream. If he continued walking like this, in less than 15 minutes, he would be able to come into contact with the factory where Kiki was imprisoned in the dream. Of course, Poplar Fruit also believed in his premonition more and more. It was too magical, too mysterious, and could not be explained. Then he did not need to think about it. He just needed to follow the directions of his premonition. There was still 1 kilometer to go. Poplar Fruit found that there were more and more traces of human footsteps in front of him. He even saw traces of wheels. Slowing down and hiding the 2 boxes of cash, Poplar Fruit quietly crept up a small hill and crawled his head out. Poplar Fruit immediately burst into tears. There was actually a dilapidated factory in the small valley in front of him. The layout of the factory was exactly the same as the one in Poplar Fruit's dream. The factory had been closed for a long time, but Poplar Fruit guessed that since it could be built in such a remote place, it should be an arsenal of the early Burmese warlords, and then it was occupied by these guys as their headquarters. But who cares what it used to be? Poplar Fruit only knew that Kiki must be here. That's right, it must be here. Poplar Fruit was 100% sure that the Jade Emperor or Guanyin Bodhisattva had given him that dream. Somehow, they had given him a clear path to save his daughter. If everything goes well, I must personally take Kiki to the temple and burn incense for the Buddha. Oh, and the Taoist temple. Poplar Fruit thought in confusion. No, I can't be too excited, I have to calm down. Poplar Fruit's eyes became cold again. He had to maintain a high level of calmness in order to save his daughter safely. Of course, before that, Poplar Fruit took a few photos and sent them to Wuxia with his mobile phone. Because it was a cross-border, they couldn't track the number that Poplar Fruit had given them. Big Brother he and the others were his only 3 reinforcements, and he needed their help. Okay, I'll be there soon. It will take an hour. Wuxia sent a message. He had Poplar Fruit's location so he could quickly find Poplar Fruit. Don't act alone. Oh right, we have more reinforcements, but they will be slower. It will take an hour and a half. Wuxia's reinforcements should be the special forces from Shu-Du military region. However, Poplar Fruit frowned. He looked closely at the 1 hour that Big Brother he had mentioned. It was already past 5 o'clock. In another hour, it would be past 6 o'clock, almost 7 o'clock. What about half an hour later? If 5 o'clock was considered the time when people wanted to sleep in, then 6 o'clock, or even 7 o'clock, Poplar Fruit believed that these bandits, who were often active in the mountains, wouldn't be sleeping like the night owls in the city. Most of them must have woken up. No, I can't wait like this. Poplar Fruit knew his daughter's location. He even knew the factory very well. He had checked it inside and out yesterday. He had to rush to his daughter's side before the bandits woke up. Even if they couldn't break through the encirclement, Kiki wouldn't be in danger with his protection. Then he would delay until Big Brother he and the others arrived. With a pincer attack, he would be able to eliminate all the bandits in the most effective way. Of course, regardless of whether they were eliminated or not, safely rescuing Kiki was the first priority. After making up his mind, Poplar Fruit sent another text message to the other party. Then he received a text message about the new location of the fake handover. Poplar Fruit suddenly had a feeling that this might be the last time he was tormenting him. There wasn't much time left for him. Poplar Fruit had to act immediately. He couldn't care less about Big Brother he's text message. Poplar Fruit returned to the place where he hid the money box. He took off the 2 Miao and crossed the scabbards on his back. Of course, Poplar Fruit only took out one of the Miao, and the other was still in the scabbard. He didn't wrap a piece of cloth around his hand and tie his hand to the knife like in the movies. There was no need for that. What Poplar Fruit needed was flexibility. He also took out the pistol from his calf, put on the silencer, loaded the gun, and held it in his right hand. A knife in his left hand and a pistol in his right. This wasn't a good combination, but Poplar Fruit was good at using knives with both hands. His left hand wasn't as good at using a gun as his right hand, so he could only hold it like this. He put both phones on silent and turned off vibration mode before he put them in his jacket pocket. Poplar Fruit had to make sure nothing went wrong. Poplar Fruit hid the 2 suitcases containing the money and a duffel bag among a pile of boulders next to the factory wall. He had made a small backup plan here, just in case. Surprisingly, although it was already half dawn and most people were still asleep, there were still some of these dangerous criminals patrolling the high towers and rooftops with guns. Of course, there weren't many of them, only about 5 or 6. After a night of peace, these people let down their guard. Some were dozing off, some were chatting in relief, and some were even playing games on their phones. Poplar Fruit easily bypassed these guards. He didn't intend to touch them, because these guards were in the open. If they suddenly disappeared, it would easily expose Poplar Fruit's invasion plan. Poplar Fruit had even made up his mind that unless it was absolutely necessary, Poplar Fruit wouldn't easily make a move. Everything was to sneak to Kiki's side, protect her, and even secretly rescue her. These criminals probably didn't expect that someone would know the structure of their base better than they did. Furthermore, someone had quietly climbed over the wall right under their noses and snuck into the exhaust duct of the factory through a small door. Chapter 1367. There was one bad thing about a tropical rainforest. Once the rainy season arrived, the humidity would be off the charts. In places with poor ventilation, don't even talk about washing clean clothes. Just casually wiping the walls would leave a watermark on one's hand. Wuxia woke up very early today. It wasn't that he didn't want to sleep, but it was too uncomfortable to sleep. It was as if he was lying on a quilt that was fished out from the water. As he cursed, Wuxia stretched his body. His skinny body did not even have any muscles, let alone abdominal muscles. It made people feel terrified just by looking at him. He swaggered out with his gun and prepared to go outside to bask in the sun. Wait until I get a large sum of money from that rich man. Then I can get 1,800,000 to buy a house in the city and buy 2 women. I don't have to stay in this corner anymore. Damn it, if I stay here, I'll be tortured to death. With such a happy thought, not only Wuxia, but everyone in the team was fantasizing about getting enough money from Poplar Fruit for a lifetime. Even if each person got 1 million in Myanmar, 1 million was enough to make them a millionaire. Then why would they still want to risk their lives here? That girl is really pretty. Wuxia thought enviously, but unfortunately she's too young. She's pretty but useless. When I get money in the future, I'll buy a mother and a daughter. I'll raise the younger one and continue to be my wife. He smiled evilly as he used his little finger to dig his nose. He carried his rifle like he was carrying a hoe. It was as if he was really carrying a hoe and going around to dig up the walls of those good people's homes. Pack, 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 pack. The footsteps of Wuxia's slippers became clearer and clearer in the long corridor. Poplar Fruit frowned. He was hiding in a dent in the metal door of the corridor. He was trying his best to suck in his lower abdomen and stick his whole body to the metal door. This was the only way to ensure that he wouldn't be seen. In the end, he was still inexperienced. If it was a Special Forces soldier like Big Brother he who sneaked in, they would definitely be able to quietly hide all of these motley crew in their beds. Unlike him, who had just come out of the vent and almost bumped into a guy who had just come out of a room. You said you were at 5 o'clock. Why didn't you sleep? Why did you come out for a walk? Poplar Fruit was a little depressed. But from the looks of it, the other party was getting closer and closer, and he had nowhere to hide. A close combat with the other party was unavoidable. He wasn't afraid of Poplar Fruit, but he needed to consider whether to use a knife or a gun. The Miaodao was too long, and it was not easy to use in a small space. The gun had its drawbacks as well. Although it was equipped with a silencer, if the bullet passed through and hit the wall, there would probably still be a sound. However, regardless of whether it was a knife or a spear, There was a drawback to using it in a place where people would definitely pass by. It was easy to leave behind bloodstains. Yongguo's mind spun like lightning, and he suddenly had an idea. The shirtless Husan swaggered past. He was very calm because the headquarters was very safe. As long as they didn't provoke the big boss, they could always live well. Suddenly, Husan felt a chill run down his spine. His slow brain finally managed to process the effect brought about by the corner of his eyes. A second ago he had walked past a place, and there was a person coldly looking at him from the side. Alone? Before Husan had the time to think about what this meant, he had already experienced the consequences. An arm suddenly stretched out from the side. He subconsciously opened his mouth, but his mouth and nose were covered by another hand. Ugh! Husan's thoughts were already in a mess. Suddenly he felt a huge force acting on his face. Following a caw-caw sound and a sharp pain, Husan saw his butt for the last time before he was swallowed by the darkness. What the hell? Poplar Fruit didn't care what Husan was thinking about. He still maintained his posture of supporting Husan, and with a hook of his long leg, he picked up the rifle that Husan had dropped. Only then did it not cause any abnormal noise. Phew. Poplar Fruit secretly took a breath. He was also very nervous. This assassination was different from dealing with Naboo. In the heart of the bandits, it was too difficult to deal with the enemy without making any noise. After taking back the knife that he had secretly placed beside him, Poplar Fruit dragged Husan back to his room and stuffed him under the blanket, pretending that he was sleeping soundly. He had to go to the 3rd floor. Poplar Fruit knew his daughter's location. He still had 2 more floors to go. It was very convenient to take the stairs, but the possibility of being exposed was very high. Poplar Fruit had already heard some people moving around. It seemed like he had to be even more careful. It was not impossible to be afraid of the outer walls, but Poplar Fruit didn't want to wait too long. He needed to use some of the hidden vertical stairs that he had explored in his dream to climb up. However, it wasn't really hidden. Although Poplar Fruit was very careful, when he climbed up to the 2nd floor, he saw a short man in his underwear walking out while yawning. He really met someone at the corner. Even Poplar Fruit was caught off guard. He opened his eyes wide, and his sharp gaze directly met the confused and frightened eyes of the other party. Without any time to think, Poplar Fruit raised the Meowdow in his left hand and rushed forward. The bright silver blade flashed, and the man also felt his vision blur. The blade had already pierced through his throat and came out from the back of his neck. It wasn't known if he could feel pain, but Poplar Fruit's movements were too fast. He simply didn't give the other party a chance to react, and directly pushed him back into the room. Gurgle, gurgle. 2 weak sounds. He couldn't shout, because his throat had already been cut. With a tremble, the short man's head drooped, and he stopped breathing. But Poplar Fruit didn't have a chance to catch his breath. His scalp was somewhat numb, because although he had pushed the man back, Poplar Fruit discovered that he had practically jumped into a den of thieves. 1, 2, 3. Including the one he had already killed, there were actually 4 people living in this room. The other 3 were staring dumbfoundedly at their companion, who had just walked out, being pushed back with a knife in his back. Poplar Fruit's reaction was half a second faster than the other party's. When one of them trembled and reached for a gun hanging on the wall, Poplar Fruit's right hand swiped at his waist, and a black pistol appeared in his hand. Pfft! A hole exploded in the head of the man who had reached for the gun, and he fell diagonally onto the bed. The other 2 were so frightened that they trembled and raised their hands. One of them hurriedly opened his mouth. Don't! But how could Poplar Fruit show mercy? He coldly raised his hand and fired 2 more shots. He didn't even need to aim, and just waved his arm in a willful manner. Similarly, 2 people fell backward. In the middle of their foreheads, 2 brand new bloody holes were dripping with dark red blood. Fortunately, it was a pistol with a silencer. Although there was still a bit of sound, it only stayed in this room and didn't spread out. Poplar Fruit's massacre here was a little merciless. Even he himself felt a little strange. It was true that he was calm, but the madness of hatred was sprouting in his heart. Saving Kiki was still the first priority, but the second priority had quietly changed to revenge. It's not enough. They haven't given enough. It's far from enough to make up for the shock and harm my daughter has suffered. Chapter 1368. He knew that this trip would not be smooth, but Poplar Fruit did not know that it would be so difficult. The distance from the outside through the exhaust passage was peaceful, but he immediately encountered a series of troubles. There was 1 on the first floor and 6 on the second floor. In addition to the 4 that he killed in the room at the beginning, there were 2 more that were standing at the connection between the second and third floors. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to attack again. Carefully reaching the third floor, Poplar Fruit almost exposed his whereabouts. At that time, when he wanted to avoid a guard with a gun, he did not expect that the guard would turn his head. Poplar Fruit had just turned around and was 10 meters away from the guard. Even if he could use the Shaoli flying dagger, he would not be able to kill the guard in an instant. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was ready to take out his gun and fight to the death with the guard. Fortunately, the guard seemed to have just taken some drugs, and his head was a little dizzy. When he saw Poplar Fruit swaying, he thought that he was one of them. Needless to say, after Yanghua entered the exhaust tunnel, there was a lot of dust and cobwebs all over his body. His handsome face looked like it had been smeared with soot from the bottom of a pot. There were patches of black and white, and he looked like one of the lowest level minions in the team. The guard with the gun muttered and walked towards Poplar Fruit. Although he was speaking Burmese, and because he had taken drugs, his words were incoherent, but Poplar Fruit still understood what he was saying. "I did not bring a lighter, lend me a cigarette." This greedy excuse and logic was good. Even if he knew that his mind was in a mess, Poplar Fruit was still a little speechless. Of course, he did not laugh at him. Instead, he put his left hand that was holding the knife behind his butt and pretended to take out a cigarette. "Hey, you idiot. Who put a cigarette in your butt?" "I saw it, it's here." The greedy drug addict reached out his hand to touch Poplar Fruit's chest. Poplar Fruit's eyes suddenly emitted a sharp light. His right hand reached out like lightning and grabbed the drug addict's right hand, which was originally holding the gun and pulling the trigger. His left hand swung. Ugh. The drug addict suddenly died. He died on the edge of Poplar Fruit's knife. Because the Miaodao was not like a dagger, it could not be pulled out. It was too long, and Poplar Fruit could only cut the middle of the long knife. The drug addict's left hand weakly, and his head was still resting on Poplar Fruit's arm. The knife's blade cut deeply into his throat, and scarlet blood gradually flowed out of the knife. Yanghua pushed him away in disgust. Of course, he still carefully placed the drug addict on the ground. Up until now, only half an hour had passed. Although Yanghua had killed a lot along the way and played until his heart was pounding, overall, he felt that everything was going smoothly. After all, he had not been discovered. Moreover, 50 meters ahead, he would reach the place where Kiki was imprisoned. He would be able to take Kiki back soon. Unexpectedly, just as Poplar Fruit removed the drug addict's body to a dark corner, there was a sudden commotion downstairs. First, there was a shrill scream, and then the whole factory seemed to have been awakened from a deep sleep. Suddenly, many shirtless people with guns came out from every room and corner. Shit! Poplar Fruit's heart sank. The sound came from the second floor, which meant that the body he had left behind had been discovered. Of course, it also meant that his whereabouts had been exposed. What's with the noise? Suddenly, there was a loud shout from the third floor. The voice was not very loud, but it was very majestic, and it immediately suppressed the panic of many people. Yanghua frowned. What he heard was actually Mandarin. Moreover, although the person's voice was a little hoarse early in the morning, Yanghua's judgment was definitely correct. It was the bastard in the video. Team leader Lu Zi and his family are all dead. Fuck, which bastard did it? I'll skin him alive. A person on the second floor shouted in a hoarse voice. Husan on the first floor is also dead. Another person on the first floor shouted in awkward Mandarin, but he seemed to be a lot more panicked. There was no hatred in his voice, only fear of the unknown. Yanghua frowned and hid in a corner. She gripped the hilt of her knife and gun tightly. They were so close. If he had 10 more minutes, he would definitely be able to rescue Kiki. But this was too much. He had been discovered. There was another way, which was for Poplar Fruit to suddenly burst out from the corner and quickly kill the gunman on the third floor, then rescue Kiki and escape. But that was not realistic. There were many gunmen on the other side. There were at least 5 or 6 people between him and the room. More importantly, Poplar Fruit did not know if there was someone in the room watching Kiki. If that was the case, Poplar Fruit might fail because he did not want to harm her. Damn it, damn it. Poplar Fruit wanted to bang his head against the wall. What should I do? There was a commotion, and the team leader outside suddenly shouted, "Come up and help me. It must be that bastard. It's okay, we have a hostage. We're not afraid of him." The cigarette addict still had some prestige in the team. Immediately, more than 10 people rushed up the stairs to the 3rd floor. And the 3rd floor became crowded. In this way, the chances of Poplar Fruit escaping were even slimmer. What should I do? Boss, ask our men to find him and kill him. One of the cigarette addict's henchmen shouted. The cigarette addict was very calm. He smiled sinisterly and said, "What are you afraid of? No matter how strong he is, he's just one person." How can that be? How is it possible for a single person to wipe out 6 branch? Someone questioned. It's definitely him alone. The cigarette addict said conceitedly. Do you think that I've spent so much time and effort to come up with a plan to feed pigs? He was tricked into coming to Myanmar by us. He definitely doesn't know about it. The cigarette addict said proudly. He's definitely the only one who can come here. Do you think those Chinese bastard cops dare to cross the border? Also, Naboo has been watching him for so long, and he's always been alone. How can he have other helpers? He's good at fighting, but don't be afraid. We have so many brothers. If each of us takes a bullet, he'll die 100 times over. The smoker boosted the morale of his men, and they gradually calmed down. However, even the heavy smoker was tired of staying on the crowded 3rd floor. He waved his hand and shouted, "Go down, all of you. Bring the hostages, yes, the hostages to the 1st floor. I want to meet this young guy." Clang, a loud sound of the door opening. Youngwa suddenly heard her daughter crying. It was very clear. The little girl cried and shouted with a somewhat hoarse voice. "You baddies, Grey Wolf, my papa and Pleasant Goat will defeat you. It's really my daughter." Poplar Fruit was happy and worried at the same time. He was happy because his daughter was crying. She should be fine, but he was worried about how he was going to save her. What should he do? Poplar Fruit's eyes unconsciously fell on the body of the drug addict next to him. Chapter 1369. Go go. Go downstairs. What's there to be afraid of? We have more people. Amidst the clamor, Yangwa could hear Chi-Chi's soft sobbing in the midst of the clamor. The little girl must be scared. The sobbing sound seemed to be amplified by a loudspeaker in Poplar Fruit's ears. It was so clear that Poplar Fruit's heart almost broke. However, even though Poplar Fruit was burning with anxiety at the moment, he could only force himself to calm down, because, with a poochie sound, Poplar Fruit stabbed the meowdow in his hand into the back of a guy's heart. The blade came out of his chest, and the long blade had long been soaked in blood, looking so ferocious and terrible. The man didn't die immediately. His pupils dilated sharply, and he still wanted to struggle, but his mouth and nose were covered by Poplar Fruit, and his head was firmly pressed down like an iron clamp, making him unable to scream or move. In the end, his hands that were pulling Poplar Fruit's fingers fell down weakly. The 6th one. Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth. His handsome face was a little ferocious at the moment, but his eyes were still terrifyingly calm. On his body, his previous clothes were gone. He didn't know when he changed into the addict's top. Of course, because it was a little short, he pulled up the black pants on his body to cover his navel, which looked funny. But the effect was very good. He was stupid and a little retarded. Poplar Fruit smeared some black and dirty oil on his face and skin, making him look more like a country bumpkin. Of course, compared to these real southern barbarian bandits, Poplar Fruit's 1.88 meters height was a little too tall. However, as long as he squatted down a little, and then put a cigarette in his ear, coupled with the messy stubble that he ignored because he was worried about his daughter, he almost perfectly transformed into a member of the other party. In the past, Poplar Fruit's acting skills were recognized as terrible, but at this time, perhaps because of the crisis, he showed the acting skills of a movie king. The frivolous and weak footsteps, the wretched temperament of a ruffian, And the silly look in his eyes when he looked at others made it impossible for anyone to connect the guy in front of them with the cultured and refined teacher Yang in school. It was precisely because of this disguise that Yang Guo was able to follow behind everyone. Along the way, she actually managed to secretly take care of 6 careless criminals. Some had their necks broken, some had their throats slit by him, and some had been stabbed in the back like just now. Fortunately, he killed 6 people and didn't attract the attention of the people in front. At first, he carefully dragged the corpses to hide behind some boxes, but after a few times, Poplar Fruit realized that the efficiency was too low. So he simply ignored it and kept following behind, killing one. But then in the square downstairs, in public, it wasn't so easy. Poplar Fruit remembered that there were still a few people standing in the corridor on the 2nd floor looking around. Poplar Fruit steeled his heart, turned around, and went upstairs to quickly kill them. There were more than 40 people downstairs, and they were noisy, waving their rifles and looking around. They didn't notice that their brothers upstairs had their necks twisted one by Poplar Fruit. It was as if they were still shouting and watching the show, but at some point, a pair of dirty hands suddenly reached out from the darkness behind them and instantly took their lives. Poplar Fruit even used ropes or belts to hang these dead people on nails or railings. Even their guns were under their arms. Up close, they were definitely exposed, but from downstairs they didn't look carefully, or from the dizzy eyes of the drug addicts. These brothers were still loyally standing guard for them. In fact, even the cigarette addict didn't notice. He raised his head, wanting to observe the situation in the factory. He was afraid that there would really be soldiers descending from the sky and killing them. However, he only saw that some people were standing upstairs, and some were even walking around. Some were even stretching and yawning, so he was relieved. But he didn't know that more than half of the brothers upstairs were already dead. Those who were still walking were just Poplar Fruit who hadn't had time to kill yet. However, the cigarette addict had a headache because his underlings were quarreling. The cigarette addict was the big boss, but he had a few underlings under him. Where there were people, there would be underworld. These people, together with their underlings, were divided into the Wuxia gang and the Guogan gang. As the name suggested, the Wuxia gang was made up of people from China, or people who had a strong ethnic background and could speak Chinese. The Guogan gang was mostly made up of locals from Guogan, and they used to be the main force of the gang. There were also some who didn't join these two gangs. For example, Nab wasn't from either gang. He was a farmer from another area who had come to mine. After being saved by the cigarette addict, he joined this small gang. However, these people were very few. Almost all of them were loyal to the cigarette addict and were his trusted subordinates. The main conflict was between the Wuxia gang and the Guogan gang. In the beginning, when the cigarette addict became the big boss, the Guogan gang was the main part of the gang. But over the years, first, it was the drug trafficking business. Then it was the kidnapping business. The cigarette addict also intentionally or unintentionally sent the Guogan gang members to do dangerous business. Because of this, the number of Guogan gang members decreased. At the same time, the cigarette addict also recruited a large number of Chinese into his gang. This way, the Wuxia gang gained the advantage in terms of numbers. Of course, the cigarette addict was very secretive. This made the two remaining small bosses of the Guogan gang suspicious. But they didn't have any real evidence. There were many conflicts, but there were no real fights. This was all thanks to the cigarette addict's iron rule. However, the more he suppressed them, the greater the backlash. The Guogan gang members had been suppressing their anger towards the Wuxia gang for a long time. The cigarette addict was worried that this gang would become a ticking time bomb. If he was given a chance, he would definitely destroy this small gang of less than 20 people. Those who weren't part of the same gang had different intentions. Of course, the cigarette addict didn't plan to care about these grudges. He planned to leave after one hit. As for the Wuxia gang and the Guogan gang, if they wanted to fight, it was none of his business even if both sides suffered losses after he left. But was it really as he wished? They hadn't received the ransom yet, but these guys already felt that they were rich. Now there was a lot of noise about the deaths of a few people. The Guogan gang accused the Wuxia gang that they were the ones keeping watch last night. They didn't take good care of the people and caused their brothers' deaths. The Wuxia gang mocked them by saying that their people deserved to die. They looked like they had a death wish. Their words were as ugly as they could be. This made the Guogan gang members, who were already angry, furious. They pulled the bolts of their guns, ready to fight to the death. The situation was about to descend into chaos. Chapter 1370. Kacha. Kacha. Even Yanghua, who was upstairs, was shocked. He poked his head out and looked down. He saw that the people downstairs were actually having an internal conflict. Poplar Fruit was not excited, because his daughter was tied to a chair. She was in the center of the storm with the leader of the gangsters. If they really fought, Kiki would be in danger. Yanggua's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. She almost wanted to jump down from the building. Although he was still the leader, the smoking man felt that the situation was getting out of control. After all, money could move people's hearts. These fellows actually dared to stand in front of him and start a fight. The smoking man felt like his chest was going to explode. Okay, shut the fuck up. The smoking man suddenly took out his pistol and fired 2 shots at the ceiling. He turned around and grabbed a leader of the Wuxia gang behind him. Do you still respect me as your boss? He spoke in Burmese. Although it was awkward, everyone could hear him clearly. The few small leaders who had been arguing earlier all paused. Of course, they wouldn't shut up obediently. They were still cursing, but their voices all became softer. The person the smoking man chose to threaten was actually the leader he trusted the most. He used his trusted aide to put on a show, and it had the effect of killing the chicken to warn the monkey. Of course, the confidant that was threatened by him also felt the burning hot muzzle on his cheek, causing him to cry out in pain. Maybe this wasn't an act. Are you done? The smoking man lowered the muzzle and turned around to point at the 2 leaders of the Guogan gang. He asked sternly, "If you're done, listen to me." Even now, the smoker still looked fearless. He was not afraid of the police. That was impossible. The Burmese border was not just for show. He was also not afraid of Poplar Fruit. After all, he had dozens of brothers with him, and there were people standing in the corridor upstairs to help watch. Even if Poplar Fruit was Superman, he would not be able to kill him. Therefore, he was leisurely and carefree. He planned to deal with the internal problems first, and then deal with the external problems later. Of course, the smoker still didn't know that all his brothers on the 2nd floor had been killed by Poplar Fruit. In total, Poplar Fruit had killed 17 people. That was more than a fifth of Smoker's lair. It had to be said that the drug had also worn away the sharpness and spirit of this drug lord whose name had resounded throughout central and northern China. Heh, now that you have money, you don't treat me as your boss anymore, do you? The smoker roared. No one dared to answer. After all, there were many people in this team who admired Smoking Ghost's reputation. Wuxia gang and Guogan gang dared to have conflicts with each other, but neither of them was willing to provoke this crazy boss who had once killed 3 traitors in front of everyone. Don't forget where your money came from. Smoking Ghost patted his chest and said sternly, "It's all because of me. I'm willing to take only 2 million in cash. The remaining 100 million will be divided among you. I'll drink the soup while you eat the meat. Without me you won't even have soup to drink." That was true. When Smoking Ghost came up with the plan, he was able to get everyone to work together because he had mentioned that he would distribute the money. As the main boss, he only took the smallest portion. That really broke all the records in Myanmar's military history. Of course, Smoking Ghost sneered in his heart. You bunch of idiots. Do you think it's that easy to take Poplar Fruit's money? Smoking Ghost understood China's system very well. For someone like Poplar Fruit who had won an award, his resources in China were not something that ordinary jade merchants could compare to. He believed that if he made such a request to transfer the money through the bank, the government would definitely track him down. Moreover, even if the money was deposited into the account, those idiots who didn't understand finance would never know how to launder the money through multiple overseas banks. When China put pressure on Myanmar, the money would definitely be frozen in Myanmar's banks. Not only would they not be able to withdraw the money, but they would also be hunted down. Therefore, not only did Smoking Ghost only want the 2 million in cash, He even pretended to be generous and asked for 10 of his subordinates' personal accounts. Smoking Ghost did not know whether they were real or not, but he knew that they were dead meat. "Don't worry, I don't want this money. When the money is paid, you can go to the bank and get the money. You can split it however you want." Smoking Ghost still remembered the admiration and fanaticism in his subordinates' eyes when he made his generous speech. Yes, the smoking addict wanted to trap everyone, including his trusted aides. He wanted them to be entangled with the police, and even let China and Myanmar eliminate these people together. Then, as the mastermind, he would escape with 2 million yuan and live a carefree life. What an idiot! Even now, they still respected him because of his generosity. The smoker cursed in secret and accepted the worship of these people without any shame. Smoking Ghost continued to threaten them. "Don't forget, as long as Poplar Fruit doesn't come and you don't get the money, all of you are still poor. If you want to fight now, go ahead and tell everyone that I don't want the money. Then you can go outside and fight. If you want the money, stay and don't make a fuss." This time, even the people from Guogan Gang stopped making a fuss. "Isn't Poplar Fruit here?" Someone muttered and questioned. His voice was not loud, but because everyone was quiet, he could hear it clearly. "He's here. Where is he? Did you see him?" Smoking Ghost asked. He turned and walked over, smashing the underling's head with the butt of his gun. The underling's face turned red and he shouted, "If he's here, tell him to come out. Come out and we can split the money." Smoking Ghost's mind was not clear. In order to maintain his mental state and deal with Poplar Fruit last night, he had injected himself with an injection. The feeling of being admired was very good, and now that he was suddenly interrupted, he immediately became furious. Smoking Ghost's words were completely unreasonable. He did not know if he had forgotten, but he was actually the one who said that Poplar Fruit was here. But now no one dared to question this big boss. They did not want to be humiliated. He didn't come, right? No one refuted, but there were many flatterers. Someone immediately jumped out and shouted, "I was on guard duty last night, and I didn't see a single rat." The people from Guogan Gang were furious. They thought to themselves, "It's fine if our boss is talking nonsense, but how dare you fool us?" However, the smoker's words made them stop and swallow their anger. "Fuck, you were on guard duty? Why didn't you stand outside? Why are you standing here?" He grabbed the guy's ear and yelled, "Do you want all of us to die with you? What the fuck? You're going to die with me, aren't you? Do you have any sense of hope? You're not even a professional thief. Are you a human or a pig?" Chapter 1371. To Poplar Fruit, it didn't matter how noisy it was downstairs, as long as they didn't fight and didn't threaten Kiki, who was like a little grass in a storm. However, what the smoker said next made Poplar Fruit, who was about to sneak downstairs into the crowd, nervous again. Let's not talk about what they were talking about. The situation downstairs had developed like this. "Boss, we were done with the night watch. It's dawn now, so we came back to sleep." The guy who had been beaten up by the smoker shouted in grievance. This time, he spoke in Mandarin and dragged a few of his buddies who had been on the night watch with him. The rest of them were depressed, but they didn't want to be beaten up, so they quickly nodded and didn't dare to say a word. "Finished with the night watch?" The smoker's confusion gradually faded, and his eyes became clearer. He asked in confusion, "Who's on the night watch now?" "No one's on the night watch," the guy said fearfully. When he saw the smoker's eyes widen, he quickly explained, "There's really no one to take over for us." He pointed at a leader of the Guogan Gang and shouted, "It's G. It's G's turn to be on the night watch. They're slacking off." It was always a good idea to divert his anger. Burmese people didn't have a surname. For example, Nabu was a name. G was a native of Guogan. He had a pair of vicious triangular eyes. When he saw the guy pointing at him, he immediately glared at him. Ever since he became a leader, everyone called him Wu Ji or Wu Ji. This person relied on the fact that he was the trusted aide of a small leader of the Chinese gang to disrespect him, and even publicly set him up. Did he think that he didn't understand Mandarin? If the smoker wasn't here, he would have taken out his gun and shot this guy. However, he didn't dare to act rashly. He just snorted and said coldly, "The night watch was little six men. Now that everyone is dead, who's taking over for you? You, on the other hand, didn't seem to have anyone to take over your shift, so you came back to sleep. I don't even know if you really stayed overnight, or if you were just lazy and didn't go." After all, he was just a small leader. His ability to sow discord was not inferior to those old foxes in the officialdom. The man's face turned as red as blood. He said angrily, "You're the one who's fucking lazy." Before he could finish, the smoker roared again. "Enough. Shut up. Gee, he can't come back to life even if he's dead. Get 4 more people to keep watch. Don't waste our time." Oh no. Poplar Fruit retracted his foot that had just stepped out. He knew that if he wanted to keep watch, he would have to go through the stairs to the rooftop and the wall. And on the stairs, there were still 4 corpses lying haphazardly. The smoking addict had the right to call the leader by his name. G was also convinced. G lowered his eyes and nodded. He was about to find someone to keep watch. It was right to look at the big picture. However, someone didn't want him to have an easy time. A small leader of the Wuxia gang interfered. "Boss, wait a minute. We can't let G's people keep watch." His tone was obvious. He didn't trust G and the Guogan gang. "What do you mean?" G wasn't the only one who was angry. His cronies behind him were also angry. This wasn't just sowing discord. He wanted the smoker to isolate them. Even the smoker was a little angry. He had just appeased both sides. I was wrong. What I meant was that G can't be on the lookout, right? It's such a sensitive time. The small leader refuted his words like a game. He didn't want to fall out with G now, so he said, Sorry. Burmese is so awkward." He wasn't wrong. That was exactly what he meant. Looking at his smug smile, the guitars wanted to turn on him immediately. "Sunfeng, what do you mean?" The smoker narrowed his eyes and asked, "We should at least ask a few people to keep watch, right?" The small leader named Sunfeng smiled calmly. "How about this? 1 person from each team, and 5 people will be on the lookout." "That's a good idea." The small leaders of the Wuxia gang nodded. Although the guitars were angry, they couldn't do anything about it. Others were trying to sow discord, but they couldn't do anything about it. The smoker looked coldly at his subordinates who were fighting openly and secretly. He was too lazy to care about them. He said, "Okay, you guys go. It's important to keep watch. Don't delay us." Important my ass. They were so tired of fighting among themselves that they forgot about Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit was still in their building. Yangguo was hiding the corpses, but he couldn't hide the bloodstains of the guy who was stabbed to death by his knife. As long as the 5 people weren't stupid, they would know that something big had happened when they saw the blood. He was so happy at that moment. Tomorrow, he would be cremated. Hearing the footsteps approaching, Poplar Fruit had an idea. He carried the body and walked down the stairs. "What are you doing?" The 5 people who were chosen to be on the lookout turned the corner and saw this scene. They suddenly became nervous. Of course, they didn't pull out their guns and scream. After all, Poplar Fruit looked like one of them. Poplar Fruit turned his head and grinned with his dirty face. He imitated the thick Burmese accent of those people and said, "Hey, Leader G asked me to take Master Lu and the others down. Boss wants to see them." Needless to say, with Yangguo's talent in language, she was able to imitate Guogan Gang's words to perfection. Even her intonation made them feel comfortable. Of course, this was only for the 2 members of Guogan Gang. But even the other 3 people didn't feel that there was anything wrong. They looked at Poplar Fruit with disdain and said with disgust, "Go away, you barbarians are disgusting. Don't get your blood on me." Yangguo had stumbled upon it by accident, because dead people were not uncommon in this place. Some died from illness, some died from fighting, and some died from their own consumption of powder. The dead were taken care of by the Burmese gang members. The Burmese gang sent the lowest-ranking person to do the dirty work. Everyone else avoided them. Even the Burmese gang members didn't suspect Poplar Fruit when they saw him. But Poplar Fruit was a Burmese gang member. He said the same thing as them. They could bully him, but others couldn't bully him. The Burmese gang members' words made the 2 Burmese gang members angry. "Do you have a death wish?" Say it again if you dare. Who is a barbarian? Trash. You deserve to die. The 3 Burmese gang members didn't want to fall out with them here, because they were just small fries. They just muttered a few words in Chinese. Then they arrogantly turned around and walked upstairs. They didn't want to lower themselves to the same level as these barbarians. Chapter 1372. Seeing the 3 of them walk away, the 2 members of the Courage Gang snorted with a look of disdain. If it weren't for the fact that they were feeling a little guilty, they would have added insult to injury. Chinese people are cowards. Perhaps it was because they managed to get back at him. They were extremely pleased. One of them reached out and wanted to pat Poplar Fruit's shoulder, but when he saw how dirty Poplar Fruit was, the feeling of disgust rose in his heart again. His hand hung in the air, not knowing whether to pat or retract it. Poplar Fruit smiled foolishly at him. He did not dare to show his teeth because his teeth were so white that he did not look like a bandit's. However, it was this kind of silly smile that made the other party feel like he was an idiot who did not know anything. What was there to be embarrassed about with an idiot? The person calmly retracted his hand and did not hide the disgust in his eyes. He only said earnestly, "Do your job well." To the small bosses, they were small fries that had to be suppressed. However, to an idiot, how could they not enjoy the feeling of being above others? Even if it was the dirty and ugly Poplar Fruit, they would still be secretly pleased by the other party's admiring gaze. Poplar Fruit pretended to be grateful, then stood there and watched the other party walk upstairs. Haha. Why are you wasting time with this idiot? Above Man's companion said to him as he walked, not caring that his words were heard by Poplar Fruit. After all, he was an idiot too. What do you know? When I have money, I'll take him in as my little brother, Above Man said arrogantly. TSK, don't be gay, or else I won't dare to share a room with you. His companion joked. Tisk your balls. Even if I'm gay, I won't be interested in an idiot who plays with dead people and trash all day long. Above Man's voice gradually faded away. It seemed that he had already reached the 3rd floor. Poplar Fruit remained in the same place. His innocent and confused eyes cleared up the moment the other party left. There was even a hint of mockery in the corner of his eyes. How reckless. Gently putting down the corpse in his hand, Poplar Fruit actually pulled out 2 hidden Meowdow from the other's clothes. The scabbard that could easily expose him had already been hidden by him. Poplar Fruit held 2 Meowdow in each hand. His hunched back straightened, and his entire person became unusually handsome. Even the determination emitted from his dashing eyebrows and starry eyes were like his unsheathed Meowdow. Sharp and unstoppable. The Poplar Fruit's figure moved, and like a pine tree transforming into a willow catkin, he quietly floated out. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. On the 1st floor, the huge factory was still in a state of chaos. Of course, no matter how much they argued, they didn't really fight. The smoking addict looked at his subordinates, who were getting harder and harder to control. He wondered if he should teach them a lesson before he left. They would be consigned to eternal damnation. But gradually, the effects of the drug wore off, and his mind became sharper and clearer. At least, the figures were no longer layers of illusions. The smoking addict suddenly remembered something important. Right, they weren't in a hurry to fight with their own people. They should find Poplar Fruit as soon as possible and make him pay the ransom. Wait a minute. Why am I here? Isn't this the last scene of the plan? The smoking addict remembered. Right, someone died. That little 6 guy is dead. Did Poplar Fruit sneak in? Wait. The smoking addict's face darkened as he controlled the situation. He turned around and grabbed one of his more trusted subordinates. Tell me that little 6 guy died. What's the reason behind it? His confidant was trembling in fear. He thought that the smoker was going to use this as an excuse to vent his anger and give him a hard time. Because he was scared, he couldn't explain clearly. Reporting to boss, we don't know how he died. But you said that he was killed by that fruit. I said that? Although the smoking addict's face was gloomy, he wasn't very violent now. He still rationally recalled what he said, but he was in a daze and couldn't remember anything. That's not right. Isn't Nabu watching that kid? He's missing, and Nabu didn't tell me? Humph, do you think I'm a fool? The smoking addict began to speculate at this time. Everyone was a little speechless. He was the one who said it. The smoking addict looked around and suddenly realized that he was wrong. If it wasn't Poplar Fruit who sneaked in, who else could it be? But for Nabu, a subordinate that he personally sent out, a person that he trusted a lot because he rescued him. The smoking addict didn't think that Nabu would lie to him. The cigarette addict was actually a very intelligent person. However, his intelligence wasn't that of a wise person. Instead, it was a little bit of intelligence that he had built from the bottom of society. He was good at scheming and plotting, but sometimes, his way of thinking was too much of a conspiracy theory. Why was he so sure that it wasn't Poplar Fruit's doing now that he was sober? First of all, Nabu had indeed been tricking Poplar Fruit, and sent back information on time according to the secret signal they agreed on. The last time he sent it was less than half an hour ago. It was also because of this that the smoking addict took the powder. He wanted to wake himself up after a sleepless night, so that he could deal with the Poplar Fruit that he had fooled around with. Besides, even if Nabu was caught by accident, the smoking addict was 100% sure that Nabu, who was willing to die for him, wouldn't reveal the location of the factory they were in now even if they tortured him. The smoking addict didn't make so many preparations in vain. Including this factory, the smoking addict had led a large group of people to move out of their original mountain hideout, and to this abandoned factory. The reason why it was abandoned was because it was only 12 kilometers away from the Chinese border. No one else would know about this choice of location. The smoking addict, who was very confident in his plan, didn't think that Poplar Fruit would be the culprit. If it wasn't Poplar Fruit, who could it be? The smoking addict rolled his eyes and looked at the Guogan gang, which only had 13 or 14 people left. Suddenly his heart skipped a beat. However, the smoking addict couldn't say it out loud. He said in a low voice, "Call Nabu. If he's still in our hands, tell the 5 big wolves to give the address to Poplar Fruit. Our people are dead. Was it not Poplar Fruit who killed them?" The 2 leaders of the Guogan gang looked at the smoking addict angrily and asked, "For people from one branch died. Are we just going to let it go? Who killed them?" This angry question was directed directly at the smoking addict, and there was no trace of respect in his tone. "Enough. We'll talk about who killed them later." The smoking addict's eyes flashed with a trace of anger, but he didn't want to argue with the other party right now. He took a deep breath and said calmly, "Let's get the money first." Chapter 1373. The Guogan gang had been suppressed by the Wuxia gang under the Smoking Ghost's rule. Did they not want to fight back? Or did the 2 leaders, who had the support of their men, not want to kill the Smoking Ghost and take over his place? Perhaps not in the past, but over the years, the Smoking Ghost had used both kindness and power to suppress his subordinates. He had also led them to sell drugs and kidnap people to earn a lot of money. Success after success made most people, including the Guogan gang, blindly follow the Smoking Ghost. But now it was different. 100 million worth of money was placed in front of everyone. Even the uncultured members of the Courage gang knew what this meant. The yuan was a common currency in small countries like Southeast Asia. Grandpa Ma once said, "Capital grows bolder when there is a suitable profit to be made. If there is a 10% profit, it will be used everywhere. If there is a 20% profit, it will be active. If there is a 50% profit, it will take risks. If there is a 100% profit, it will dare to trample all the laws of the world. If there is a 300% profit, it will dare to commit any crime, even at the risk of being executed." The same logic applied to the warlords and bandits. Even if the 100 million yuan was divided equally, everyone would gain more than 1,000,000 yuan. The money might not be able to do anything in China, but in a poor country like Myanmar, 1,000,000 yuan was a huge sum of money that could be used for a lifetime. Although the leaders only wanted cash and did not want a single cent of the 100 million yuan, it did not stop the Guogan gang from being greedy. If the 100 million yuan was divided equally, the Guogan gang would definitely get less. So in private, the Guogan gang felt that the distribution plan was a little unfair. They had even gathered together these days to privately discuss a countermeasure without the main leader. But after all, they were uneducated and did not know anything about military strategy. Before they could figure out a countermeasure, they had already lost a lot of men. 4 of them died for no reason. No matter how they looked at it, it was a loss. Even if they only had 10 or 20 people left, they would not be able to withstand the Wuxia gang's bullying. The more they thought about it, the more they felt that something was wrong. However, they just couldn't figure out why. After Smoker gave the order, the Wuxia gang gave him face. Someone immediately gave Smoker a phone call. The Smoker waved his hand impatiently and said, "Beat him." Was there a need for the team leader to make a move for such a small matter? However, this little lackey immediately took the phone from his ear and looked at the team leader awkwardly. He didn't pick up. He pressed the button. The Smoker frowned and took the phone. Just as he was about to call Nab back, the phone screen lit up, and a message popped up. It was in Burmese. "Boss, I'm tracking someone. Call me back later." In the crowd, where the Guogan gang members were gathered, a criminal at the back of the crowd secretly stuffed his phone back into his pocket. If someone were to stand face to face with him, they would be surprised to find that the bandit in front of them had a pair of eyes as sharp as an eagle's. It was Poplar Fruit. He had changed into a new disguise. First, his clothes. Because the previous one was stained with blood, it was easily exposed. Therefore, this time, his clothes were much cleaner. Some of the simple decorations were taken from the 2 members of the Guogan gang, who had just gone up. Poplar Fruit had already taken care of the 5 people who had gone up. They all went up from behind, not even giving them time to grab their guns. Poplar Fruit used his hands to break their necks. Of course, there was one person from the Wuxia gang in the end. Poplar Fruit used his gun with a silencer. There was no other way. The 3 people from the Wuxia gang were standing together, and it was difficult for Poplar Fruit to kill all 3 of them in one go. Because of his disguise and his low profile, Poplar Fruit secretly hid in the outermost part of the crowd. No one noticed that there was a new brother next to him. However, the smoking man's tactics made Poplar Fruit break out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, he had muted Nabu's phone. Poplar Fruit clenched his teeth and turned off the phone call from the other party. Then he imitated Nabu's tone and sent a text message to the smoking man. He didn't know if it was effective because it had been more than half an hour since he came in. Logically, Nabu should have taken the initiative to contact the smoking man, but Nabu was long dead. Poplar Fruit had forgotten about it, so he didn't think about contacting him. However, Poplar Fruit secretly glanced at the middle of the field. It seemed to be effective. The smoking man believed it. When he saw the text message, he felt that Nabu was standing in front of him and talking to him alive. Poplar Fruit imitated him very well. Moreover, there was one thing that the smoking man didn't think was a problem. After running for half a night, he believed that even if Poplar Fruit was an Iron Man who knew Kung Fu, he should be exhausted. So, it didn't matter if he was late. The smoking man waved his hand and said calmly, "Okay, you don't have to bring Poplar Fruit anymore. Inform the 5 big wolves to send the factory's address to Poplar Fruit and ask him to come over." Poplar Fruit secretly let out a sigh of relief. However, it wasn't time for him to relax. This time, he had taken the risk to sneak into the factory hall on the first floor because he had a very clever idea to implement. Poplar Fruit's back and legs were slightly bent. He was rubbing his foot with a rifle that he had seized from an unlucky person, as if he was scratching an itch. At the same time, he lowered his head so that the other party couldn't see his face. Then he muttered to the person next to him, "Why do I feel that Brother Six's death has something to do with that stupid Chinese gang? They want us to all die, so that the rest of the money will be theirs." Poplar Fruit pretended to complain in a low voice. In fact, while he was killing, Poplar Fruit was listening to the various arguments downstairs. Of course, he wasn't gossiping. From these noises, he had figured out the habits of these people, including the rules of words, pronunciation, and address. Of course, only Poplar Fruit, who had a superb talent for language, could quickly grasp and imitate them. Now that he had spoken, the criminals next to him didn't treat him as an outsider. Instead, because of Poplar Fruit's casual complaint, his eyes lit up. Right, why didn't I think of this? He was also a low-level underling, but this didn't prevent him from angrily sharing this discovery with other people he was more familiar with. Almost everyone who heard this reasoning couldn't help but discuss it with the people next to them. Then, they all glared at the abominable Chinese. It was as if the ugly faces of the other party had become even more abominable. Chapter 1374. Poplar fruit sowed the seeds of discord. Then, amidst these small fries' heated discussion, he casually waved his sleeves and quietly left without leaving a trace. Yes, he wanted to incite hatred between the two parties and cause chaos in this group of 40 to 50 bandits. This way, he would be able to fish in troubled waters and secretly rescue his daughter. Poplar fruit changed his position and secretly stood behind the crowd, looking at Kiki, who was pitifully tied to a chair. The little fellow had become thinner. No one knew a daughter better than a father. Poplar fruit acutely sensed that Kiki's face, which originally had a little baby fat, had really turned into an oval face after being kidnapped for 2 days. Unfortunately, her oval face wasn't beautiful. Her face was so pale that it had lost its original rosy luster. Seeing his daughter's thin appearance, Poplar fruit almost couldn't hold back his tears. She must have refused to eat the bandits' food. After starving for 2 days, not to mention the discomfort of being tied up, Kiki was already on the verge of death from hunger. Even her frightened cries had become weak. Perhaps when she was first brought down, Kiki's spirits were lifted when she heard the smoker confusedly say that her father was here. Then she was full of hope that her father would be like a pleasant sheep, punching and kicking all these bad wolves away and then saving Kiki. Kiki was really full of hope, but her father didn't appear as she wished. Kiki could only lower her head and cry softly. The quarreling of the bad guys around her was as scary as lightning in Kiki's ears. Poplar fruit looked at his daughter with great heartache. Not only was he afraid that his daughter's crying would hurt her body, but he was even more afraid that this would leave a psychological scar on Kiki because of this. But before that, Poplar fruit had to think about how to save Kiki and not let her get hurt here. Poplar fruit really had no choice but to use this method to sow discord between the two gangs. Both sides were at daggers drawn. If a fight really broke out, Poplar fruit really didn't know if he could ensure that his daughter wouldn't get hurt. But if he didn't do this, both sides would unite under the smoker's mediation, and Poplar fruit would have no chance. Poplar fruit's hope was placed on the smoker, who he wished he could cut into pieces. As the leader, he should be able to stop the conflict between the two sides. Then everyone would quarrel for a few more minutes. That way, Poplar fruit could wait for reinforcements to arrive. Poplar fruit had already contacted Wuxia and the others. Wuxia was also surprised by Poplar fruit's unauthorized action, and almost scolded Poplar fruit. But because of this, Wuxia and his teammates sped up and tried to shorten the time needed for reinforcements to arrive as much as possible. But Poplar fruit never expected that the smoker wasn't as stupid as the other criminals. After arranging everything, the smoker, who was resting on an iron block, suddenly remembered something. The phone that he had received the text message from earlier wasn't the phone that he had used to contact Nabu. Because of the emergency, he hadn't brought that phone with him. After the smoker's after effects, his mind became clearer and clearer, and he had already regained his original wisdom. The more he thought about it, the more he broke out in cold sweat. No. Nabu couldn't have called him boss through someone else's phone. If Nabu had been instigated. No, Nabu couldn't have been instigated. If he had been caught, then, didn't that mean that they had lost their surveillance of Poplar fruit? Then someone died in the factory. Could it be? Wait a minute, how did they know that my people were hiding here? Or wait a little longer. If the person who died in the factory wasn't Poplar fruit's doing, but the Chinese gang's doing, it didn't matter. But Nabu had indeed fallen into the hands of Poplar fruit or his people, and they didn't know the final destination at first. But now he had taken the initiative to send the message to the 5 wolves. The smoker took a deep breath and pondered. Could it be? But the smoker faintly felt that it wasn't that simple. He wondered if he had missed something. That must be it. On the other side, the 2 leaders of the Guogan gang listened to their men's report, and their eyes widened as they slapped their thighs. No one went to find out who discovered this problem. Of course, even if they did, they wouldn't be able to find the mastermind behind the scenes, Yang Guo, who had mysteriously disappeared. Under the leadership of the two leaders of the Guogan gang, a group of people suddenly pulled the bolts of their guns and fiercely pointed them at the Chinese gang behind the smoker. Wait a minute, what are you doing? The smoker, who was still pondering over the clues, was scared out of his wits. If there was really an internal conflict, he wouldn't be able to hide in the middle of such a spacious factory. Team leader, you have to help us today. The two leaders of the Guogan gang saw that the other side had more than 20 guns, while they only had a dozen guns. They immediately lost their confidence and hurriedly looked for the smoker to ask for justice. Team leader, our people must have died because of these damn Chinese people. They shouted in grief and indignation. They must have wanted to take our money and secretly killed our people. That's right. The people behind them weren't afraid of death, and were clamoring for revenge. Poplar Fruit's palms were sweating as they were about to lose control. He slowly moved forward, ready to jump forward and use his body to protect his daughter if he really opened fire. But the smoker seemed to be more nervous than him. He shouted angrily. Are you stupid? Let me tell you, it must have been Poplar Fruit who did it. That's right, don't slander me. When did I kill your people? If I want to kill you, I'll kill you openly. There are only a few of you. If I open fire from upstairs and downstairs, I'll definitely kill you all. The Chinese gang members also shouted unhappily. They really hadn't done it, but they were also tempted. They also wanted to monopolize the 100 million yuan, but they didn't like being slandered like this. That's enough. Stop arguing. The smoker angrily took out two guns, one on the left and one on the right, and pointed them at the more prestigious leaders on both sides. He shouted, Ji, Sun Feng, take care of your people. If you make trouble again, I'll kill you too first. The Chinese gang was the first to back down, but Ji looked at the smoker angrily. He was affected by his emotions just now, and the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. He shouted, Team leader, are you still on their side? At first you said it was Poplar Fruit who did it. Then you said it wasn't him. Now you're saying it again. Do you think we're fools? Do you think we can be fooled by you like this? Ji's shout stirred up the emotions of the Guogan gang members. Chapter 1375. Poplar Fruit thought that he was just teasing the Guogan gang with a candle, but he did not expect that his teasing almost caused a prairie fire. After a few people passed on the rumors, Ji and a few other core members of the Guogan gang heard that it was no longer Poplar Fruit's version. Instead, some people mixed in the rumors and made it sound like they had witnessed the conspiracy with their own eyes. Those who could reach Ji's position would not be so easily deceived by their subordinates. However, when they thought about it, they realized that there was really a problem. The leader, the smoking addict, went back on his words. He said one thing and another. Just now he swore upstairs that it was the rich guy called Guo who did it. But then he went back on his words, saying that he did not say it, and that it was not Guo who did it. Fortunately, Little Six's family did not have any brothers, so no one stood up for them. Even if the smoking addict justified himself, no one cared too much. However, now that they suspected the Chinese gang, why did the smoking addict change his words and say that it was Guo who did it? Bullshit. Rich people were all fat pigs who only knew how to order people around. How could he kill people? Moreover, how many people did he kill in one breath? It did not make sense. Ji had seen a lot of rich people crying after being kidnapped. He did not believe that young people like Little Six, who at least had guns and combat power, could be killed so easily. The only possibility was that someone thought of it just now. It was definitely the Chinese gang who did it. Only they would have the ability to kill 4 people in one go without alerting anyone. The more Ji thought about it, the more shocked and angry he became, especially when he thought about Smoker's behavior. Judging from all the signs, he was actually covering for the Chinese gang, allowing them to bully the people of Guogan gang as they pleased. Anger was just a trigger. Although Ji and a few other core members of the Guogan gang did not communicate, they began to think about their own escape route. Or rather, the entire Guogan gang's strategy. It was impossible to reconcile with the Chinese gang, and it was difficult to fight them head-on. After all, they were few in number and weak. As the most prestigious member of the Guogan gang, Ji wanted to raise the flag and lead a dozen of his men to rebel. Then he could either join someone else or gather his troops to fight against the Chinese gang. In any case, they did not want to be bullied by these cunning Chinese anymore. However, they were unwilling to give up before they got the money. Therefore, Ji's eyes flickered. He decided to make a fuss and let the smoker, who would not abandon them for the time being, make a decision. No matter what, only crying children would get candy. However, the smoker wasn't stupid. He didn't have great wisdom, but he was a grandmaster in scheming and scheming. The smoker narrowed his eyes as he looked at the group of ingrates with hatred in their eyes. They actually had the intention to rebel? A sharp glint flashed through the cigarette addict's eyes. But he didn't show it. The smoker suddenly put down the gun in his hand. His hand moved, but he didn't put it back into the holster. A bright smile blossomed on his face as he walked up. As if he didn't see the glossy muzzle of the gun, he gently patted the angry members of the Courage Gang. All right. What was there to be angry about? We're all brothers. Put your guns away. The smoker unquestionably pressed down on the guns of the few important people in the front row and said with a glare, "What? Are you afraid that I won't give you a share of the money? Don't worry. Little Six and the others died, but they didn't die in vain. I, the smoker, guarantee that they will get the money that they deserve. Take it all. Our brothers in the mountains have principles. Since these brothers died, arrange for someone to give the money to their families. If there are orphans or widows, arrange for them to be taken care of, right? Why would we take their money? I'll leave it all to you, Ji." "Okay." The smoker patted Ji's shoulder and casually glanced at him, waving his hand generously. Okay. Boss, you're so wise. Boss, you're Baolong too." Jun imitated the compliment one of the smoking addict's Chinese subordinates had given him and nodded with a smile. Okay, how could it not be okay? Ji was beaming with joy as he returned the bullets to his gun. He was overjoyed. Only the bandits who knew how to shout could get more money. They were the ones who had fought for this result. The smoker might have talked about compensating the families of the dead, but the money would definitely be divided among them. Who cared about the families of the dead? The dead were already dead, so who cared about their families? It seemed that the deaths of Little Six and the others were really worth it. 4 million for 4 people. Even if it was divided evenly, it would be hundreds of thousands per person. Of course, for Ji, this money would almost all go to his brothers. It was already good enough for the others to get some soup. However, for the people of the Guogan gang, this funeral had really become a happy occasion. Even Ji was so excited, let alone the others. The eyes of the short-sighted guys of the Guogan gang were all shining with excitement. Of course, the Zhonghua gang wasn't so willing to let these people have a share of the cake. But at least for now, the few small leaders of the Zhonghua gang were willing to listen to the smoker's orders. The smoker gestured for them not to act rashly, and they all calmed down the angry brothers behind them. Of course, the eyes of the few small leaders, including Sun Feng, were not so friendly. They were more shrewd than the uncultured Guogan gang members, but after all, they were just gangsters. They could endure it for a while, but they couldn't endure it forever. If the smoker didn't give them a satisfactory answer, even the smoker wouldn't be able to make them share the cake in their hands so easily. The smoker didn't bat an eyelid. He put his arm around Ji's shoulder and said with a smile, Okay, we're all brothers. Don't be unhappy. Right now, it's more important to get the money. Huzi, you guys take the hostages outside. Let's go to the factory and get ready to welcome the guests. Guests? That's our money bags. 100 million. You idiots. The smoker scolded his stupid cronies. But from an angle that Ji and the others couldn't see, he suddenly winked at Sun Feng and the other small leaders of the Zhonghua gang. Sun Feng and the others were shocked. They had been with the smoker for a few years, so they knew that this was a big move. Without batting an eyelid, Sun Feng made a gesture, and a dozen of the more trustworthy backbones quietly reached their hands into their pockets. Among the Guogan gang members, Poplar Fruit was the only one who was keenly aware that something was wrong. But how could he care about what was wrong? Seeing that his daughter was about to be taken away, he was anxious. He secretly tore off some of the customary decorations of the Guogan gang and quietly moved toward the Zhonghua gang, or rather, toward the factory entrance. The atmosphere unknowingly became somber. Chapter 1376. Uncultured gangsters were all like that. They would quarrel with you for the slightest benefit, but when the benefits exceeded their expectations, they would want to be your brother. Sun Feng looked down on these lazy poor people from the bottom of his heart. Normally, they only wanted to make quick money easily and then enjoy their lives comfortably. They would spend as much as they earned. This was the case when they were selling drugs, and it was the same when they were in the kidnapping business. As soon as they had money in their hands, they wanted to spend it as soon as possible. They would spend it all in just 2 days playing cards. Unlike the Chinese, they were more or less aware of danger. Although they often indulged in debauchery, everyone had secretly saved up a lot of money. Even if they stopped being bandits in the future, they could still save up some money to do other work. Therefore, Sun Feng was not willing to be associated with Ji and the others. He even thought that they were lazy black sheep and took a large amount of their money. He wanted to get rid of them as soon as possible. Therefore, when the smoking addict signaled that he was ready to take action, he and a few of the Chinese gang members secretly whispered to a few of their confidants. They found a dozen trustworthy and reliable brothers, and secretly formed a circle around the Guogan gang. Of course, the smoking addict still had his arm around Ji's shoulder and chatted happily. The topics that these rough men could talk about were nothing more than pornography and gambling. When they talked about what they were going to do with the huge sum of money after they had made a fortune, their interest soared all of a sudden. He. Ji rubbed his hands, revealing his dirty yellow front teeth. He smiled wretchedly. Then I'll have to buy 2 wives. One to give birth to babies, and the other to love. That's right. It's best if you take turns giving birth to babies. You won't be left out for a few months. The smoking addict patted Ji's shoulder with a fake smile. He laughed loudly, but there was no trace of a smile in his eyes. In terms of height, the smoking addict, who was born in the northern part of China, was a little thin, but he was still a head taller than these malnourished guys from Southeast Asia. Ji felt uncomfortable being hugged by the smoker, but he did not want to push the smoker away. He could only force himself to ignore the smoker's enthusiasm. However, both of them were talking loudly, and the people behind them could hear them. It was enough for their imaginations to run wild. The smoker glanced around and patted Ji's shoulder with a smile. He hugged Ji's arm and shouted, "Hey Ji, if you have something to say, just say it. Why do you have to call me by my name?" Did she think that they weren't close enough with their arms around each other's shoulders? Ji turned to look at the smoker in confusion, but a black gun barrel suddenly appeared in front of his eyes. What? Ji was an experienced criminal who often struggled between life and death. When he saw the gun barrel, he felt suffocated, as if his life was hanging by a thread. His pupils dilated, and he struggled instinctively. However, the smoker had him in a death grip and couldn't move at all. Wait a minute. Before he could finish his sentence, the gun barrel that was as deep as a black hole had already spat out flames. Bang. There was a loud bang. It was really uncomfortable to be so close. Ji, the most prestigious member of the Guogan gang, had half of his head blown off. Red, white, and black brain matter exploded and stuck to the smoker's shoulder and face. The smoker didn't care about the disgust. He quickly turned around with Ji's dead body in his arms and used him as a shield. Most of the people didn't react in time. Only a few experienced leaders realized that something was wrong. Do it! Sun Feng roared. He took the lead and pulled out his pistol, shooting at the remaining leader of the Guogan gang. The leader was also brave. He reacted quickly and pulled a person beside him to block Sun Feng's bullets. He screamed and pulled out his pistol to fight back. Bang! There was another gunshot. The leader trembled as if he had been struck by lightning. Blood oozed out of his back, and he fell down weakly. It was the smoker who had shot him in the back. In an instant, gunshots rang out. The rest of the Guogan gang were also caught off guard by the dozen or so gunmen from the Chinese gang. They were cut down like wheat before they could even raise their guns. Of course, there was one who was more skilled. He was as fierce as Rambo. He screamed and waved his AK around. Several of the Chinese gang members were killed in an instant. But he didn't have a good end. He was shot full of holes by 5 or 6 guns. After all, he wasn't invulnerable like the Terminator. But other than the unlucky ones killed by the AK, the smoker and the Chinese gang took care of the rebellious Guogan gang almost effortlessly. Sun Feng felt good. He felt like every cell in his body had been injected with hydrogen. He felt like he was floating. As he cursed, Sun Feng kicked the members of the Guogan gang who were lying on the ground. The pistol in his hand didn't stop. He changed the magazine and shot at the heads of the people who hadn't died yet. The Guogan gang, which had been a big force in the group, had been wiped out. Other than the smoker, the others couldn't believe their eyes. They'd been talking and laughing, but the smoker had turned on them in an instant. He'd shot Ji in the head, and the dozen or so gunmen had slaughtered the rest of the Guogan gang. The rest of the people looked at the smoking addict, whose body and face were stained with blood. Not only did they not feel disgusted, but the reverence and worship in their hearts grew crazily like weeds. Only Sun Feng was still cursing. How dare you steal my money? Eat shit. He wasn't satisfied with the last shot, so he kicked the dead. All right. Sun Feng, they're dead. The share is ours. What's there to be afraid of? The smoker said coldly. Go call a few of your brothers. Go upstairs and take care of the 2 lookouts. We'll make sure there's no future trouble. Sun Feng didn't speak. A few of the more nimble ones rushed upstairs. Wait. Where's she? Where's the girl? The smoker roared. He pushed aside the crowd that was still looking at the dead body and rushed in the direction where Kiki had been tied up. The chair was empty. The ropes had been cut, and the 2 men who had been guarding it were lying on the ground. Their throats had been slit, and blood was flowing everywhere. Stunned, he turned around and saw a figure flash by the door. Go! The smoker roared. He had guessed that Poplar Fruit must have snuck in and rescued Ji Yinshu during the chaos. The smoker was about to explode. He didn't want to think about the consequences of this failure. These guys obeyed him because of the huge bounty. If he didn't fulfill his promise, even if he was still the leader, he wouldn't be able to escape the fate of being killed by his men. No, he hadn't run far. The smoker chased Ji Yinshu out of the factory and saw Poplar Fruit, who was only 50 meters away. There was no place to hide. The smoker gritted his teeth, took out his gun, and aimed at the tall figure. Chapter 1377. Poplar Fruit had retreated to the back when the Zhonghua gang had surrounded the Guogan gang. Fortunately, he had discovered it early, or else he would have been dragged into the whirlpool of gunfire. Poplar Fruit's heart was beating very fast. When the gunshots rang out, he immediately realized that this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. He didn't care about stealth at all. He directly shook off the large group and strode toward the 2 men who were preparing to carry Kiki. The 2 men didn't react for a while, or rather, their attention was attracted by the infighting in front of them. When they saw Poplar Fruit walking over, one of them curiously asked Poplar Fruit, "Hey brother, is it?" However, the latter half of his words came to a halt before he could finish. Poplar Fruit was expressionless. 2 sharp long knives suddenly slipped out from his sleeves. He had taken them out just now, and then hid them in his clothes with a magic trick. The 2 men were shaken by this miraculous scene, and subconsciously lowered their heads to look. However, the saber rays poured down like moonlight and instantly filled their eyes. When they reacted, their throats were already broken and filled with blood, which didn't allow them to react. Poplar Fruit's knife skills weren't too fancy. The 2 simple knives followed different trajectories, and cut the throats of the 2 men at the same time. At the same time, Poplar Fruit also moved toward Kiki, who was tied to the chair in a daze. The knife passed and the rope was cut. Poplar Fruit was wild with joy. He passed the 2 knives to his left hand, squatted forward and held Kiki's weak body with his right hand. The little girl had suffered too much. She hadn't eaten for 2 days, and her bones seemed to have become lighter. The first thing that caught Poplar Fruit's eyes was Kiki's hands and feet that had been tied up. The purple rope marks were shocking, and Poplar Fruit couldn't help but shed tears on his daughter's face. Perhaps feeling her father's heartbeat, the little girl with a pale face and cracked lips finally moved. She cried in a hoarse voice, "Papa!" Her voice was really very low. Kiki's forehead was hot, as if she had a fever. She didn't even have the strength to open her eyes, but her little hand holding Poplar Fruit's clothes was unusually strong. "Father is here." Yanggua's mouth opened and closed as 2 lines of hot tears rolled down her cheeks. She said silently. It wasn't that he couldn't make a sound, but that he couldn't. He couldn't alarm these bandits. However, Poplar Fruit seemed to be able to communicate with his daughter's heart. Bit by bit he conveyed his vow. "Don't worry, Papa will get you out of here safely." Looking at his daughter's pitiful appearance, Poplar Fruit felt as if a knife was being twisted in his heart, but he didn't have time to look at his daughter. He didn't even have time to wipe the tears off his daughter's face. Poplar Fruit clearly realized that he was still in the enemy's camp. Even if he was holding his daughter, there were still bandits with guns and shouting around him. The only thing he could do now was to escape. It had to be said that it was really not easy for Poplar Fruit to control his emotions at this time. However, these emotions of joy and sorrow from seeing his daughter again were not completely unaffected. His judgment was affected. In this case, the best situation was to take Kiki and sneak upstairs while the crowd was in chaos. With the help of the complex structure of the factory, they could play hide and seek with the bandits. With Poplar Fruit's superb skills and his understanding of the factory, he could have lasted for a long time. However, Poplar Fruit didn't do that. At that time, he only had one choice in his mind, and that was to take Kiki and escape from this bandit's nest. It wasn't hard to understand. Poplar Fruit had already killed all of the enemy's lookouts. As long as he successfully escaped from the factory and jumped over the wall that wasn't too high, the bandits wouldn't be able to catch up with him in the forest. Only then would Kiki be truly saved. Therefore, he bent over and used his body to cover his daughter as he secretly moved toward the door. Unfortunately, the cigarette addict was too sharp and immediately noticed the problem. Poplar Fruit heard the screams behind him, but he could only rush out of the door and flee. Poplar Fruit ran very fast. If someone measured his speed, they would see that Poplar Fruit, who was carrying my daughter, was running as fast as a seated athlete in the national games in the 100-meter race. However, no matter how fast a person was, he couldn't be faster than a bullet. Poplar Fruit, who was only more than 20 meters away from the nearest wall, could only watch helplessly. When he heard the gunshots behind him, Poplar Fruit subconsciously curled up his body to protect Kiki. Bang! 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 The bullets hit the ground, the wall in front of him, and the trees in front of him. The splashing stones and sawdust were like a rain of bullets, sweeping toward Poplar Fruit. Humph! With a muffled sound, Yanggua felt as if her right leg had been stared at by a large wasp. She couldn't exert any strength in her next step. As a result, while running at high speed, her front and back legs tripped, and Yanggua fell heavily. Even Kiki was dizzy from the fall. However, with her father's protection, she wasn't seriously injured. Stop! 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 The important thing had to be repeated 3 times, but the smokers still angrily smacked the guns in their hands. Only then did they stop. Are you going to kill him? If you kill him, who will pay you? The cigarette addict shouted angrily as he slapped one of the men's faces. At this moment, Poplar Fruit had just sat up. However, the cigarette addict's men had already caught up to him. They formed a circle and pointed their guns at Poplar Fruit, looking at him cautiously. Although Poplar Fruit looked pitiful after being shot, they knew that the man in front of them was not someone to be trifled with after seeing their throats slit by Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit's leg was in pain. The bullet had bitten his thigh from behind. It didn't pierce through, but the finger-sized hole was bleeding profusely. Poplar Fruit clenched his teeth and concentrated his energy to close the wound on his right thigh. He couldn't stop the bleeding, but the bleeding slowed down a lot. But what was the use? With more than 20 guns pointed at him, Poplar Fruit knew that even if he was possessed by Zhang Sanfeng, he wouldn't be able to fight his way out. He smiled bitterly in his heart. He felt hopeless. It was so close, yet so far. Poplar Fruit couldn't escape. He hugged his daughter tightly in his arms. The little girl woke up from the fall. She didn't know what was going on, but she felt safe in her father's arms. She buried her head in her father's chest and fell asleep happily. Don't cry anymore. Silly girl. I'm useless. I couldn't save you in the end. I'm sorry. Chapter 1378. No matter how noisy his subordinates were, the smoker kept sizing up Poplar Fruit. His ugly triangular eyes stared at Poplar Fruit's face like a snake's. It really was him. The smoker had seen those reports and videos, so he could recognize Poplar Fruit even if he turned into ashes. However, when he saw the real person standing in front of him, the smoker's heart couldn't help but thump. This was the person who had been his nightmare for the past few years. Even if he hadn't had nightmares for the past year, Poplar Fruit was still the hurdle in his heart that he couldn't get over. Poplar Fruit calmed down. Whether he lived or died, he had lost the ability to control his own fate. If that was the case, then the father and daughter would face life and death together. Now that Kiki was in his arms, and he was hugging his daughter tightly, it was as if he had returned to the night when the little one suddenly appeared. He was helpless, but they were connected by blood and would live and die together. Moreover, no one could separate them now, so he wasn't afraid anymore. The only regret he had was that if he died, then he would have let down Fong Bei's love for him. Thinking of the girl who had cried so much but was so determined before she left, Yanghua sighed faintly in her heart. Right, there was still Zheng Yujia. Poplar Fruit thought of her. He felt sorry for her perseverance. If he couldn't survive, then she had to find a good family and a man who loved her deeply. She had to live well. Of course, Poplar Fruit hadn't completely lost his will and hoped to live. He still had one last trump card. Big Brother he and the others were rushing over at full speed. Poplar Fruit didn't know when they would arrive, so he hoped that he could drag it out until they arrived. That way there would be hope for survival. Poplar Fruit wasn't annoyed by the bandit leader's strange look. He only glanced at him coldly. You didn't even make a sound after being shot. You're a real man. The smoker's voice became a little sharp. It wasn't a compliment at all. His eyes were full of mockery. He beckoned for his men to bring over the 2 Miaodao that Poplar Fruit had left at the entrance of the factory in order to run faster. The Miaodao was so heavy that ordinary people would find it difficult to hold it with one hand. He just casually threw them in front of Poplar Fruit. Of course, there was a distance of 4 or 5 meters between them. With so many people holding guns, they were not afraid that Poplar Fruit would suddenly hurt them. TSK, people's hero Poplar Fruit, you're relying on these 2 swords to survive, aren't you? At this moment, the smoker seemed to have untied a heavy knot in his heart. He was so pleased with himself that he started mocking. Bullshit hero of the people. Why don't you try using your knife in front of our guns? Give it a try? Poplar Fruit frowned and looked up at him. The wound on his leg was very painful. The bullet was still lodged in it. This was the first time he had been shot. His black trousers were soaked in blood, but Yanghua clenched his teeth. He didn't want to show his unbearable pain to these bandits, but his left hand was tightly gripping the grass. Blue veins were popping out. It was obvious what kind of pain he was enduring. You have nothing to say? Weren't you quite talkative when you were receiving the award? The smoker mocked. You're the person who escaped from the bank robbery in XX County. Poplar Fruit suddenly said, which stunned the smoker for a long time. How did he know? He wanted to say it, but he hadn't even started. How did he know? He hadn't escaped just now. Instead, he had been injured and surrounded. Poplar Fruit had been a little too pessimistic. However, at this moment, Poplar Fruit's brain had calmed down. Although it was very painful, it didn't stop him from analyzing rationally. In Poplar Fruit's opinion, the smoker's words were too vague. It wasn't as vicious and cunning as when he had dealt with the Guogan gang in the factory. What he had said when he received the award reminded Poplar Fruit. This person in front of him had been paying attention to him for a long time. If he wasn't an enemy, why would he pay so much attention to Poplar Fruit's situation? Moreover, didn't Big Brother he help him analyze the possible origins of the bandits who had kidnapped Kiki? Now that Poplar Fruit had calmed down and thought about it, He felt that the smoker's personality was very similar to the 3 bank robbers from before. Cruel, sinister, and unscrupulous. This was He Wenjua's evaluation after looking at their previous cases. Humph. The smoker froze for a while, then snorted coldly and said, "It seems that you've guessed it too. But it doesn't matter. Since you're going to die, I'll let you know. I'm the one who wasn't caught by you. He's still on the wanted list, yeah. The smoker laughed strangely and said, "So what? People like us who exchange our lives for riches and honor have always been a thorn in the side of the police. But can they catch us? Do they dare to come to Myanmar to catch me? So you captured my daughter in order to kill me and avenge your brothers?" Poplar Fruit's right hand held his daughter tightly, and his left hand loosened. He endured the pain and stood up with his left foot. Poplar Fruit would rather stand in pain than look up at these bastards. However, when he stood up, the robbers around him were so scared that they took 2 steps back. The smoker slapped them and scolded, "Useless. You're even afraid of a cripple." However, the small leaders who heard their conversation did not look happy. Sun Feng's face was cold as he asked, "Leader, don't you think you're being unkind? Are you joking with all of our lives? If you want revenge, why mention the 100 million and let our brothers risk their lives for you?" The smoker's killing of Lucky had scared a lot of people, but it would never scare old foxes like them. They knew that without their help, the smoker would have been shot to death. Yes, they respected the smoking addict as their leader, and were willing to risk their lives for him. That was because the smoking addict could bring them glory and wealth. However, it did not mean that they would be willing to be used by the smoking addict and help him count money for nothing. The smoker's face darkened as he shouted, "Sun Feng, you've been with me for 2 years. Have you ever seen me like this?" Many people from the Guagan gang died in the past, but they didn't even know that they were betrayed by the smoker. "I'm taking revenge? Revenge my ass. Those people who died in his hands were not related to me. Even if they died, I would still laugh for 2 days. Is there a need for me to reject money?" The smoker said arrogantly. His voice was so loud that all the people present could hear him clearly. "I kidnapped him because he's a billionaire." That was true. Sun Feng and the others had seen the information when the smoker and his men had gathered. Otherwise, they would not have kidnapped a child. If word got out, they would not be able to be bandits anymore. "Did you bring money? If you didn't, don't think about leaving here alive." Sun Feng did not trust the smoker who went back on his word. He asked Poplar Fruit with a gloomy face. "Yes." Poplar Fruit looked at them coldly but still nodded. For the time being, he did not want to provoke the murderous intent of these bandits. If he said that he did not bring money, he and Kiki would be shot to death by a group of red-eyed people, let alone the smoker. Brother Feng." A lackey who had just gone upstairs ran over in a panic. Not good. Chapter 1379. Big Brother Feng. The underling who ran over saw the mysterious atmosphere between Sun Feng and the cigarette addict. He couldn't help but swallow his saliva and address Sun Feng dryly. Then he said in a panic, "Something bad happened. The people upstairs are all dead." "What? What did you say?" Not only Sun Feng, but the cigarette addict also shouted nervously. "They're all dead." The underling squeezed out a few drops of tears and said, "The second floor and the roof are all dead bodies. There were more than 30 people, and they're all dead." Why did he have to pretend to be sad? Because he knew that one of the dead people was actually the younger brother of a gang leader with the surname Mo. Gang leader Mo couldn't hold back anymore. He rushed up, grabbed the underling's collar and asked, "What did you say? Are you kidding? Our Mo boy. Big brother Mo. He's dead too." The underling shouted in fear. "Except for us who just went up, everyone else is dead." "You brought an outsider here?" Sun Feng pulled the bolt and looked at Poplar Fruit fiercely. He was close to gang leader Mo, and Mo Bue, who was dead, was also one of his people. Not to mention, the 30 people that the underling mentioned were almost all from the Chinese gang. "I came alone," Poplar Fruit said coldly, looking at the barrel of his gun. "Enough." The cigarette addict pushed Sun Feng's gun up and said sternly, "Sun Feng, don't you want money? How did they die?" The cigarette addict turned to the underling and asked. He didn't believe that Poplar Fruit had brought other people. After all, the border was there. Besides, if there were other people, how could Poplar Fruit be caught by them? Some had their throats slit, some were shot to death, and some had their necks twisted behind their backs. The underling looked at gang leader Mo timidly. The last sentence was, of course, meant for him. "I will kill you." Junior leader Mo's eyes were red. He pulled out the gun in his hand and was about to rush toward Poplar Fruit. However, he was stopped by Sun Feng this time. In the end, junior leader Mo, who was already in a mess, fired his gun into the sky, and was then disarmed and pushed away. Can a dead person be resurrected? The smoker was right. Instead of trying to take revenge, it was better to get the ransom money and the piece of cake that they had been craving for a long time back. Sun Feng was different from Ji. He was a smart man, and a smart man with good eyesight. "Hand over the money, and I'll let you go." He looked at Poplar Fruit coldly. The gun in his hand was still loaded, and the threat was obvious. Poplar Fruit also looked at the other coldly and asked, "Why should I believe you?" These words had several meanings. Some were doubtful. If you said you would let me go, would you really let me go? There were also those who tried to sow discord between Sun Feng and the team leader next to him. It was hard to say who had the final say. The meaning of these words was different in everyone's ears. The key was how they heard it. The smoker had no intention of going against Sun Feng. He was like an emperor who had been robbed of his power, but he could still be the emperor in name. He interrupted and said, "Do you have any other choice?" Sun Feng didn't want the smoker to shut up. They were both smart people. He knew that he couldn't fall out with the smoker directly. The smoker still had a few trusted aides in the crowd, and Sun Feng might not be able to convince the remaining 20 to 30 people. However, they seemed to have reached a consensus at this moment. They wanted money. Sun Feng snorted and said impatiently, "Hurry up and hand over the money. Otherwise, don't blame us for being ruthless and killing your daughter." This wasn't a threat. These desperados had reached the point where there was nothing they couldn't do. Speaking of which, they had to thank the smoker. He had been suppressing these people with iron blood. Of course, he was also worried that Poplar Fruit would fight them to the death in a fit of anger. Therefore, although Kiki was tied to the chair and looked miserable, she wasn't harmed at all. Poplar Fruit was silent for a moment before saying softly, "It's in the south. There are a few rocks by the wall. The money box is hidden there." Suddenly, the eyes of the 20 or so bandits lit up like bright light bulbs, brighter than the sun that had just risen in the sky. It even caused a small commotion, but it was quickly suppressed by Sun Feng and a few other team leaders. "You go and get the money," Sun Feng commanded. The person he sent out was his trusted aide. "Wait." Sun Feng's face suddenly turned gloomy. He looked around and called his trusted aide back. With the money in front of him, it seemed that he couldn't trust anyone now. "Let's go together." In the end, it was Poplar Fruit who carried Kiki. Enduring the pain in his leg, he staggered in front. A large group of people surrounded him as they walked out of the factory and walked to the money box hidden in the rocks. In the middle of the crowd, the smoker, who seemed to have lost control of his subordinates, sneered secretly. It wasn't just Poplar Fruit, who was pretending to be calm, or Sun Feng, who thought that he had successfully seized power. He actually had a deep plan in mind. "All of you must die." When the money box was opened, the bright red stacks of money made everyone's eyes turn red. Even the guy in charge of opening the box trembled, and almost threw the stack of money in his hand to the ground. However, Sun Feng pushed Poplar Fruit fiercely. The unsteady Poplar Fruit was pushed to the ground. He only cared about protecting Kiki. The broken rocks on the ground made him grimace. "Are you kidding me? This is 100 million? Sun Feng was furious. He pulled the trigger of his gun and fired at the ground beside Poplar Fruit's feet. "Where's the money?" Poplar Fruit grimaced, but he laughed. "Do you think I can run around here with 100 million? Am I Superman?" Of course, this was sarcastic. Poplar Fruit paused but still gave Sun Feng face. He said, "This is only 2 million. As for the other 100 million, let me go, and I'll ask someone to transfer the money to the account you gave me. That's right. Sun Feng had been so focused on the benefits he could enjoy after seizing power that he had forgotten about this. Back then, they had agreed that the money would be transferred into 10 different bank accounts. His face turned red and white, but he kicked Poplar Fruit's injured leg. Ah! Although Poplar Fruit's perseverance was amazing, his injured leg was connected to his heart. After being kicked on the wound, he didn't dare to dodge. He suffered a loss and couldn't help but cry out. At this time, Kiki's closed eyelashes trembled and she opened her eyes. In a daze, she saw the twisted expression on her father's face. She called weakly, "Papa, Papa." "No, Dad is fine." Poplar Fruit pressed his daughter's head tightly in his arms, for fear that she would attract the attention of these bandits. "Dad will find a way to get you out." That you're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.